Listen closely. Something in the hoe doesn't want you to leave, and it learns your name the longer you stand in its quiet. The rain falls in threads so fine they stitch the air shut. The moss swallows every footstep, and even your breath sounds borrowed, like it belonged to someone who was here before you and never made it back. Your phone clock drifts by minutes you never lived. Your compass circles like it's circling a drain, and from the trees comes a sound that doesn't match the mouth that makes it. If you hear what sounds like your own voice just ahead on the trail, don't answer. The forest isn't calling for help. It's measuring how close you'll step to the place where the hush gets absolute and the path under you moves. And by then, it's already behind you. You step into the hoe like a slow breath you didn't realize you were holding. And the forest answers by closing around you with a softness that feels kind until you notice how completely it muffles your sound. The moss drinks your footsteps. Your jacket scuffs against fern tips and makes no ripple. Even the drizzle seems careful with you, stitching a fine mist into your hair and sleeves until you are part of it, damp at the edges, blurred by green. The trail you chose was supposed to be easy. A simple loop cut through old growth where the trees arch like ribs and the light filters in broken and stained. But the forest receives you with that hush people write about. And you understand, briefly, why anyone would lower their voice here without being told. It is not reverence. It is caution. The quiet is not empty. It is listening. They call this place one of the quietest soundscapes in the country, and within minutes you know why. Every surface is padded, every trunk upholstered in moss, as if the forest has been tenderly swaddled to stop it from crying out. You hear your breathing and realize that if you stop, the world stops with you. And you wonder how far this quiet goes, how wide, how deep, and whether the boundary is something you can walk across without feeling it slide over your skin like a membrane. The rain is constant but timid, the kind that turns the air into a medium you move through, thicker than air and thinner than water, a perfect reason to keep your head down and your hands inside your sleeves. The first odd thing is the clock. You glance at your phone to check the time because the dimness makes it feel later than it is. And the minutes don't line up with what your body thinks you've walked. 15 minutes become 27, with no sense of having lost anything. The stretch of trail between two interpretive signs doubles itself like a bad photocopy. You tell yourself it's the canopy playing tricks with light. The way moss pulls sound away and leaves you alone with heartbeats and little bodily noises you don't normally hear. The second odd thing is your compass app. The arrow swims, a slow circle, as if the phone can't decide which way points to the parking lot you left behind. There is a warning about relying on devices in wild places. You remember reading it in the park's guidance, something about planning and safety and not letting yourself be lulled by signals that can falter where the trees crowd in. And you pocket the phone with a shrug that feels like a lie. You tell yourself to keep moving. The rain might be heavy here. More than 100 inches a year, you'd read, an architecture of water. But it is the noise of it that drains away first, as though the forest is drawing sound into itself the way it draws moisture, fattening the ferns and the lichens and the breathing damp of the earth until everything is steam and chlorophyll and slow rot. There are other hikers at first. A couple in bright jackets, speaking too loudly because they're nervous and don't know they're nervous. A family with a child who argues about walking. A solitary photographer stepping off the trail to point a lens straight up at a vault of branches. They pass in ordinary ways, with nods and small smiles. And then, without any break at all, there are no more people. You stop and listen for a footfall that isn't yours. A voice, the squeak of a backpack strap. And the forest gives you nothing but the soft, percussive tapping of droplets and some distant, careful motion that might be a bird or might be something heavier, transferring weight through brush with patience. You tell yourself you wanted this. This is why people come. For the green, the quiet, the rain that isn't wet until you look at your wrists and realize your cuffs are darkening. You tell yourself you are lucky to be early, to miss the crowd that will arrive when the day brightens. Because the hush of this place is reputed almost formal, a thing people defend and measure, a silence they talk about protecting like a fragile species. It gets darker without getting late. The canopy glues itself together more tightly as the trail narrows and lifts, and you pass under a natural arch where a tree has bent and fixed itself like a rib in an enormous thorax. The air smells close and clean, humus and damp wood, and something sweetly green like a greenhouse. The trail markers are infrequent but present, and you relax when you spot a small sign you recognize from a blog post. A reminder that this is a loop that people take their families on, that the moss is thick enough to suggest fur and the trees old enough to hum if you lean against them. Still, it is within that comfort that the third odd thing takes shape. A kind of static in your head. Like the quiet has reached a pitch your ears can't translate, and with it a whisper that is not a whisper because it contains no sound. It is instead a rhythm your body knows and pretends is your own. It says your name, except you are alone. You pause and wait for the inevitable explanation. A hiker rounding the bend, a voice bouncing off damp trunks. But the loop offers only the green hallway ahead, and the suggestion of movement in the periphery that you've already learned is the ferns breathing in the weak light. You decide to speak. You say hello, a quiet testing word meant for human distances, and your voice takes one step forward and falls into the moss, and nothing returns. You listen more carefully and catch a different noise entirely. A thin popping like bubbles rising through mud. Then the shiver of something very large stepping once through wet leaf litter a long way off. Your heart accelerates. The list of animals here is not long where danger is concerned. Elk, black bears if you blunder into them wrong, cougars that avoid you 89 times out of 90. But the certainty that something has taken an interest curdles your sense of the trail and of yourself on it. You move again. Your footfalls remain stolen. Your breath sounds like it belongs to someone else wearing the same lungs. After a while, the trail seems to consent to your wish to be done. There is a subtle tilt in the way the path curls, a hint of the loop turning back toward the place where cars exist and voices get casually thrown and phones behave. You walk faster. You look up more often for sky as if checking a pulse. The fourth odd thing happens near a small, shallow pool where the canopy opens just enough for the light to make a pale coin on the water. You notice it because the air there is cooler and the smell freshens, not brighter but cleaner, as if you've wandered under a drip line and into a temporary wash of clarity. The surface is clouded with flecks of green, and there are no ripples until there are. A set of concentric rings that move without anything to start them. You step closer to test the trick, to see if your breath could be enough to disturb the surface, and you see a shape where your reflection should be. Yourself, yes, a distortion of a face made monstrous by the low angle and the ripples. But over your right shoulder, something long and gray, the outline of a person so thin the arms seem wrong, like saplings, like poles wrapped in cloth. You do not turn right away, because you have learned that your eyes play with the edges of things here, and you blink and wait for the shape to thin to nothing. The water clears. You see yourself again. You look over your right shoulder anyway, prepared to laugh at a snag or a branch, and of course, there is no one. The trees there are damp and hung with beards of moss. The hush holds, and for a strangled second, you think you hear the forest breathing like a sleeping animal. A long, slow inhale that pulls at your clothes. You back away from the pool and you do not check it again. By now, the fifth odd thing does not feel unusual at all. The loop should have taken less than an hour, and yet your phone claims you've been walking much longer than that. Your step counter adding numbers like a fever, working itself into a peak. The battery drops too quickly, the way it does in cold weather. Except the air is not cold, only wet in a way that insinuates itself into fabric and bone, without offering the bite that would explain electricity draining. You find yourself counting. You count your steps between certain ferns, between a sign and the curve where the trail narrows, between the ribbed arch and the shallow pool. The counts do not match the second time. They don't match the third. The trail ahead looks like a familiar section from earlier, and that could be the nature of loops and of forests full of repeated designs. Except your own heel print exists where you haven't been yet. An imprint darker, where the moss is thin, the tread pattern unmistakable. You follow it and find it again ahead. You stop. The quiet becomes a pressure. You say your name aloud like a charm. The forest returns it without sound in the shape of breath leaving your own mouth. The decision to leave the trail happens the way certain bad ideas do. Gently and with the reasonable conviction that all you're doing is shortening a curve to link back up with the evident loop you keep missing. You slide under a damp branch and move through ferns that cling the way wet fabric does. And you promise you'll go 20 paces, 30 at most, and then angle back toward the groove of footsteps millions of visitors have carved over decades. The ground gives slightly, soil knitted with roots and softened by rot. And you move in a careful pattern, touching trunks and marking your path with disturbed fronds you tell yourself you could recognize from any angle. The air deepens. It feels like walking into the mouth of a room you didn't want to enter. A bedroom at night, with the door pulled nearly shut and the light gone. It smells older here. Less of green and more of the sweet tang of decay. A tannin bitterness that speaks of wood falling and becoming earth. You move your headlamp braided into your hat without turning it on. You do not want to make a circle of light for anything to stand at the edge of. You are not lost. You say this, and it is briefly true. There is the angled light from a gap in the canopy that you will use to orient yourself. There is the sound of the river, a hush like a faraway crowd, a constant broad band of noise that cuts under the finer silence of the trees, and you will aim for it if the trail continues to refuse you. You are not lost. You are inside a folded map, and you are convinced that if you unfold it carefully, it will spread into something sensible under your hands. You take the 20 paces you promised, then 10 more because you are certain you see the seam of a path ahead. And when you push through and discover not a trail but a corridor of trees leaned together to form something like a nave, you tell yourself it is good anyway, because the density implies something easy is near and nothing this elaborate grows where people thrash about. You say your name again without meaning to, maybe to call yourself back to the good sense that brought you here in the first place. And that is when the forest answers for real. It is not a word you hear. It is the shape of your name, carried on exhale, the way your mouth would form it if you had cold air and saw your breath. And it comes from ahead, behind, and closer than your shoulder. You feel it along your jaw, a warm spill of moisture like a person standing too close. You freeze. You refuse, for a full 3 seconds, to turn. When you do, The space you left is full of what must be ordinary trunks and shelves of fungus and the strange dripped curtains of lichen that always look like something put there by hands. Except now there is also the suggestion of a figure between two trees, tall and thin and gray, with a green sheen on its surface, unmoving and so reluctant to separate from the background that your eyes keep knitting it back into bark. You tell yourself that fatigue and the hush and the wet have made you foolish, that you are mistaking a paired set of trunks for a person, a pareidolia engineered by a forest expert at confusing edges and lines. The figure does not sway with the branches. Its shoulders are too square. It has the dimensions of a man wrapped tight in something, but without the interruption of a face. You refuse the idea it is looking at you. Refusal is a style of courage you convince yourself works on things that didn't have a choice about being here. You step back. The figure does not move. You step again, slow and careful so that nothing in you startles into running. You want to blink and find the gap filled with only what belongs in a forest. You blink and it is closer by an unmeasurable margin, the way bad light makes margins bleed. Your breath changes. It grows careful. You normalize the possibility that panic in a place like this tastes like choking on soft air. You decide to speak again and choose a word that isn't your name because you will not put that in the air for anything else to hold. And you say sorry. You don't have a reason. It feels right. The forest does not accept or reject the apology. It eats the sound. You finally turn and walk toward the river's long hush, the way a person walks toward a human-made sound in a disaster. You do not run. Running would make you interesting. Running would make you pray. You walk until a step goes wrong, and you dip to your knee in a pocket of soil. And the wet smell of it is like the smell of a newly opened basement, old and private. And you think of all the matter beneath you that used to be upright and is now part of ground. And you put your hand out to a trunk to pull yourself up. The trunk is not where you expect it. Your hand closes on something that yields, and the layer under your palm slides like a heavy fabric over a tall frame. You make a sound together. You, your startled intake. It, the small, almost polite shift of weight that suggests whoever has stood here for too long is moving aside or closer. Your fingers come away with a canvas of damp moss imprinted on them like grease. You wipe them on your pants, and your hand leaves a streak the exact height of your thigh on the dark fabric, a mark you will see later and not be able to own. You do not scream. The forest is built so that screaming is pointless, and some old part of you knows not to waste breath inside a room designed to take it. You stand up. The hush grows dimmer, and the river's constant shushing grows sharper, as if you have stepped out of one frequency and into another. And you aim your body toward it, like a needle on a compass, snapping to a line that stops wobbling. The canopy breaks in a narrow seam you have not earned, and the light that comes down is so thin it clarifies rather than brightens. And through that seam, you glimpse the pale gray of an overcast sky and believe in it the way people believe in signs. The river is louder now, and you think about flood maps and the way the Hoe from a distance looks like a ribbon of milky slate moving heavy with silt. And you count that as good because rivers have banks, and banks have path networks. And you can put your feet on something mythically stable like gravel. You do not look behind you because it feels like an invitation. You keep your head turned slightly to the left so you can watch the ground near your ankles and the turn of the trail for anything that looks like a return to any place you've seen. You begin to hear one more sound underneath the river's voice. A slow set of footfalls timed to yours but not matching, with a weight that is neither heavy nor light, like a person carrying something too dear to jostle. At the edge of the trees, The air changes again, and this time the change tastes like metal and wet stone. And the river announces itself in a wind drawn across its surface. You break out to a bank that isn't the bank you left earlier. A secondary braid of the river edged in stones that look like bones. The relief you expect does not arrive. The quiet comes with you, pressed into your clothes. The sound of the river occupies one section of your head and leaves the rest for the forest's quiet to pour into. And the combination makes you dizzy. You crouch because you choose to, not because your legs give. You put your hand in the water to prove to the body that something here behaves like a thing should. Cold, moving, the opposite of the heavy, held feel of air back in the green. The water wraps your fingers and robs them of heat, and you close your fist around nothing as if you could take the river back with you into the trees to make a corridor. You count to 5. You pull your hand out and watch it steam in the lace of rain. You notice your reflection in the quick, broken surface, and for one sliding second, you see not your face, but a long, thin shape standing directly over you. And beyond it, the green dissolves into ribs. You stand. You move along the river, staying where the stone is packed and the brush thins, and you aim yourself toward the idea of a trailhead, because your mind is certain that if the cars and signs exist, they must exist downstream as much as upstream. The forest attends to you without branch snap or breath on your neck. It holds you in its muffled palm. When the path reappears, because it does, grudging but real, you step onto it with the tentative foot of someone testing an ice sheet. The dirt is compacted. Your heels find familiar pushback, and you follow it with a speed you justify as practical. The interpretive sign you pass is blank with rain, the text a blur, and you do not lean close to decode it because the idea of bringing your face close to anything here makes your skin clammy. You check your phone once as a joke to yourself, and it shows a time that doesn't make sense, and a battery at a percentage you don't remember dropping to. You do not take a photo. The last thing you will want later is proof that matches your memory. The parking lot arrives like an error. It is abrupt and embarrassingly normal. The rectangle of asphalt with painted lines, a trash can with a sticker that reminds you not to feed the scavengers, a set of cars with human sounds trapped inside. A child's complaint leaks from a cracked window. A trunk slams, someone laughs in a short, too loud burst, and you flinch at the violence of it after hours inside muffled green. You stand for a moment at the boundary where the trail burps you out into ordinary, and you try to reconcile the two worlds. The thing that stood between the trees belongs to the one behind you. The gray, thin outline is not here. You wait, half expecting that if you look back, you will see it standing at the edge of the trailhead sign. Patient, done with pretense. There is only the forest, pretending convincingly to be forest. You approach your car with your keys already in your hand, and your mouth tastes like wet copper. You get in. You lock the doors because habit is an easy kind of magic. You sit for a long time without starting the engine, and your breath fogs the inside of the windshield exactly where you would expect it to. You write your name in it with one finger and then wipe it away so quickly it feels like an apology to something that might be looking. On the drive out, the road runs alongside the river, and for a few minutes you let the water be the only thing that exists because it is unambiguous, carrying its burden of silt and rain with muscular indifference to you. The trees lean over the asphalt and make a tunnel, and you speed a little, then slow, because speed seems like a dare. You reach the point where the entrance station will sit in your rear view, and the signs with tasteful fonts will assure you that the park exists in a set of agreed-upon rules. You consider stopping to look at your hand where you touched what you told yourself was a trunk and see if the moss has left a stain you can't scrub off. You do not stop. The rain, which had been delicate, begins to insist a little more, and you watch the wipers carve a rhythm across your view in two steady arcs, like someone counting time. You do not look into the trees more than you must. You do not look to the passenger seat, no matter how convincingly your body tells you it would be normal if someone sat there, damp, thin, patient, smelling of clean rot and wet cloth. You steer carefully. You think of the countless people who have walked in without incident, how the quiet made their shoulders drop, how the moss made their photos soft and pretty, how they went home and slept without waking to their own names whispered from outside a bedroom door. You think of the handful who felt the quiet evolve into a pressure, and the rain into a veil, and their own breath into borrowed property. Later, in a room with dry air and corners and a thermostat, you will try to tell the story the way it should be told to a person who was not there. But the words will refuse to behave. They will break into impressions and fragments. Your mouth will insist on the hush first, as if the auditory fact is the only one that matters. And then the smell. And only after that the shape in the water that made you finally admit what the quiet had been promising. You will not say monster. You will not say ghost. Those are shortcuts and mistakes. You will say the forest had a person-shaped absence that filled itself when you looked at it, and that it learned your name from the breath you wasted. You will laugh once and tell whoever is listening that, of course, it was nothing. That the Ho is famous for battering phones and confusing compasses, making people feel like they've been walking longer than they have because of how the canopy eats light, because the science of it is sound. And you will make that laugh for yourself as much as for them. In the middle of the night, if you wake to the idea of someone standing at the end of your bed with a damp patience, you will not turn your head right away. You will wait to see if your breath returns to you sounding like itself before you invite anything else to be real. And if a thin whisper brushes your cheek the way fog does when you step into it, and if it has your name in it, even without voice or lips, you will not answer. Here, you will tell yourself, there are walls. Here there is no moss to drink what you give away. Here is not the place that listens back. You don't come to the Ho expecting voices on tape. You come for air you can sip and the kind of green that feels like it's thinking about you. That's what she told her audience the night before, leaning into the cheap mic, half laughing at herself for booking a solo week in a rainforest to restore the channel's vibe. She framed it as an experiment in quiet, a series where she'd record long, clean soundscapes and lay whispers over them later. The plan sounded easy. Walk a mile or two down the Ho River Trail each morning, sit in the moss at 1 square inch of silence, and leave the recorder open while the place breathed. Back at the car each afternoon, she'd scrub the files and pull out texture. Rain like tinsel, ravens fluting, water stitching itself into the banks. Her subscribers liked the sincerity as much as they liked the fear. They'd been telling her for months to stop with the haunted hotels and give them something real. Here was real. Here was a canopy that edited airplanes out of the sky and a river that spoke in a low, full sentence all the time, and ancient trees that made her human voice embarrassingly small. She didn't bring a camera. She brought a Zoom recorder wrapped in a Ziploc and foam, 2 spare SD cards, a notebook sealed in a freezer bag, a broad brim hat, a rain shell that felt like tissue, and a hand-drawn map someone had scanned and posted 5 years ago with a little heart drawn at the exact boulder marking the famous square inch. She planned around busier hours and started early, walking the trail when the only other life on it seemed to be breath and dripping. In the first 50 yards, the forest sifted her down to a hum. The highway slipped off her back. The parking lot became a rumor. She timed her steps by the river's steadying voice, and found the branch trail that hooked toward the little clearing she'd only seen in photos. And for a minute, she let herself be just a person, not a channel. Someone who had come to see how quiet the world could get. She set the recorder on a backpack at knee height and checked the red light for the fourth time. The audio levels barely kissed their markers. It wasn't silence. It was a woven sound too clean for the city. Rain unpicks differently on moss than it does on asphalt. Wind is a body without edges. Birds make their small, confident declarations. She scribbled a quick note in the plastic-wrapped book. 8:14 a.m., light rain, river to the south. No planes for 6 minutes. And sat still. The stillness made her aware of her mouth, of the way breath touched her teeth, of the hospital quiet between heartbeats. There was a kind of impatient joy with it first. She would bring this back and lay a story over it about pressing your ear to the world, and they would comment that it felt like being there, like being held. At 11 minutes, a thread of sound entered the weave. Not a bird, not a drip, a syllable opening like a seam under the noise. She told herself it was the river reshaping a pocket of air under a log. She told herself it was her own throat working and the mic catching some biological shift too subtle for the head to notice. She kept still, because movement is a footprint in audio, and because you can't know a sound until you let it behave. The thread came again, dragged across the bed of rain and leaf and far water. Her name. It wasn't true. It was a coincidence in the bands. A two-phoneme smear that happened to line up with the shape of her. She let a grin slip because the mind is a pet that loves tricks. She watched the red light. She ignored the itch between shoulder blades that told her the quiet had turned a degree heavier. She played it back right there, hunched against the backpack with the tiny speaker at her knee. Bad practice. Playing audio in a quiet field is like lighting a cigarette in a hay barn. It repays you by ruining what you came for. But she needed to know if it was real, if the recorder had invented her. She scrubbed back with a fingernail and listened. Rain, river, a crisp blank that wasn't blank, a syllable arriving without footprint. The not-quite voice had no breath under it. It came from a mouth without lungs. It pronounced her name like somebody trying it on, slow and curious. The second one came closer. The third one came from behind, as if it had learned about left and right. She turned the device off, and the world became suddenly more full. The way a room feels when the refrigerator stops and you realize it has been working all along. The instinct to speak her name out loud rose, and she bit it until it dissolved. She would not feed anything that had learned that shape. She packed without ceremony, even though there was nothing chasing her out, because nothing should have been speaking over rain like an instrument layered in. As soon as she stood, the forest revealed its height again, its patience, as if it had corrected for her scale. She knew enough not to make drama where there was none. A sample in the noise, misheard, a brain bored by patience. She walked back toward the river's louder band, the trail a brown seam stitched through velvet green, and remembered how people talk about this place making clocks slide. She checked hers because superstitions are just rituals for when you're out of control. The time said 9:11 and then 9:13 without going through 9:12. She told herself she'd misread. She told herself there are whole studies on how humans do with time, and the answer is badly. There were 2 more sessions that day because she is not a person who scares easily from a voice with no lungs. She set up farther down, where a huge nurse log was hosting an entire bright city of seedlings, and then later near the trail's edge where the ferns grew as tall as her chest. Each time, the weave came through pure. Each time, at roughly 6 minutes, the not voice tried her name like a key on a ring. She spoke once, not her name, but, "I hear you," because a microphone cannot be only a net. Sometimes you throw it like a coin and wait for it to sing. The voice did not learn the word. It learned that she was listening. When she played that one back, it did not get louder. It moved forward, as if a mouth had stepped closer to the mic stand. She formatted one of the SD cards out of impatience, a small, angry act. And as soon as she did, she felt the ridiculousness of doing ritual technology in a forest that doesn't register such gestures. She slept in her car because the cheap cabins were full, and because she told herself she wanted to wake into the fog that the river makes by morning. A small miracle she'd filmed once at a lake. The hoe pours everything into the air, and in the low places, it hangs in soft filaments that slide across the road and catch on the bumper as if fog can snag. She kept the recorder between the seats like a talisman and woke twice to small sounds that were only rainfall hitting different parts of the bodywork. Once, she woke with her own name fresh in the mouth. She reached for the recorder and didn't touch it because she would not invite anything inside the car with her. She rolled the windows down a spit for condensation and dreamed about phones failing and woke to her battery a little too low for a night in which it had slept. The next morning, because the mind uses routine like rope, she walked directly to the square inch with her breath pegged low. She set the recorder. She wrote the time. She did not press play. She put the notebook away and placed the Ziploc on top of it, and watched the tree lines for the first human shape of the day. The forest does not curl around a person immediately. It takes its time, it reforms itself, and she stood still and allowed it to finish. When the rain on her hood became part of the weave, and when the river lost its individuality and became bed, she pressed record. It came at 4 minutes, which made her laugh once, a small sound the forest ate with interest. The not voice had shortened the interval between attempts. It said her name as if this time it believed it. The shape of it filled the space just ahead of her shoulder, low, where a person would stand if the person was made of mist and bad decisions. She did not play this one back. She recorded until the card filled. An hour she gave to whatever was happening because part of this was still an experiment, and an hour is a number that exerts order. And when the red light clicked off, she stood and shouldered the pack and walked the other way. Whether or not something without lungs could follow, the trail was a line, and lines are designed to lead you to doors you know. The following day, she brought the lavalier. It wasn't better than the Zoom. It served a different purpose. She clipped the mic to the edge of her collar and set the recorder in a pocket where it could do its small machine work while she moved. This session, she said later, was not an attempt to record the place. It was a test to see what moved with her, if anything did. She did not greet the square inch, did not set up in the clearing as if at an altar. She walked. She narrated to the audience without the camera being present, about the underfoot give of the trail, about the way moss changes the smell after rain, about how even crows sound like new additions here. But she kept the narration to nouns and verbs and observation, stripped of the pronouns that make a mouth open for a name. She followed the trail along the river's pale braid, past a section where nurse logs made a broken bridge into the trees, past a cluster of sitka, whose feet were webbed with roots that looked like a hand doing a spell, past a place where elk had drooped the grass as if a large thought had napped there. She let the lav capture this plain song of walking in a place that tries to forgive you your noise. When she listened that night on headphones in the driver's seat, the song was clean, a lovely hour of someone moving through a body made of quiet and water. At minute 17, a word slid forward. It fit into a breath she had taken. It interrupted no rain. It was not hers. It said her name in the space her exhale created, and then repeated it with a slightly different pressure, as if trying to match her mouth. She scrubbed back and listened again, and found that each time she heard it, the body knew the moment earlier, expecting it the way you expect a jump in a film even when you know better. She pushed forward and listened again. At 33, it came again, a foot closer. She realized the pattern, and her stomach felt as if she had driven too fast over a hill. The voice had chosen the moments when she exhaled, when the body opened, to put itself inside her breath. She took the headphones off, and then put them back on and listened to the last 10 minutes and decided she was done. She said it anyway, because saying the word done exerts control. I'm done. The empty car accepted it. The rain accepted it. The recorder sat where she had placed it like a tame thing. Her heartbeat went steadily hard and then steadied. There is no point at which a person becomes irrational. There are only layers of good sense thinning until a new rule emerges. Get away. She slept that night in a motel 40 minutes away, with a ragged carpet and a TV bolted high in a corner. And there, in a room with angles and a humming ice machine in the hall. She stayed awake for the first half of the night, listening for breath that wasn't hers. Twice, the refrigerator cycled, and she almost sobbed with relief at the human ugliness of it. The third time she woke, it was because she had turned her head, and in the corner of the room, near the ceiling, a darker strip of dark had lengthened the way a shadow lengthens when someone steps into it. She didn't turn on the light, because the light would make the absence into something with edges. She looked at the shadow and spoke into the motel air. I'm done. The dark strip unshaped itself and dissolved in the modest, brave glow from the parking lot. She drove away the next afternoon with the kind of shame that attaches to people who leave a thing they announced they would finish. A shame that isn't warranted by anything but pride. Her audience would forgive. They liked her well enough to accept a blank square rather than a music bed. She planned a new story, less about haunted quiet and more about the human skin and how sound becomes a membrane. She thought she would title it with a joke about names, and put the recorder in a desk and let it put its little red eye to sleep. She didn't open the files again until the following week. Work piles up. Life insists. Fear rearranges itself into something you can pick up and look at without getting residue on your fingers. When she did finally listen in the apartment, with a plant in the window and not enough kitchen space and the refrigerator doing its human drone, she put on full cans, closed her eyes, and let the hour lay its weight on her. She had to finish the experiment, if only to give herself a shape to refer to later when the body asked questions at 3 a.m. Rain, river, careful feet, an animal moving far off. Her breath. Breath again, the space where she laughed once, because the voice spoke early, like a neighbor who interrupts. She was braver in headphones. There is something about committing the ears completely that creates a border. Sound stops at the skull. The room is outside. You can lift the cups and break the spell. The first instance arrived at 4 minutes and made the skin of her arms pebble. The second at 9 made her mouth part. At 17, the not voice said her name inside her exhale, and she held her breath like a child under a blanket. At 33, it joined, close as a hand cupped at the ear. At 49, it said the name and then a second word that might have been here, or might have been the next syllable of her name curving wrong. And between 56 and 57, the recorded world altered. In the field, in the forest, she had paused at a trail junction to turn and make sure the long, human line of path existed behind her. On the recording, the rain slackened. Her breath took 2 longer pulls. Her shoes whispered on wet duff. Then there was the sound of her name, not laid over the breath, but stitched under it, as if it were the bed and her lungs the instrument. After it, a sound like 2 fingers sliding down wet glass. Then the gentle sound of something brushing fabric. Her collar, she told herself, the lav mic moving. Then a third sound that did not belong to the forest, to the river, to any man-made gear, a sound that belonged to mouths. A click of a tongue on the palate, small and soft, close at her ear. She yanked the headphones off and stood so fast the chair bit her calf. Her apartment did not change. The plant still needed watering. The refrigerator still hummed its domestic life. She sat again because the only way to prove to the animal that she was not prey was to behave like a person between walls. She pressed play. In the last 6 minutes of the recording, the not voice learned a new trick. It didn't try her name. It tried her breath out of order. It put an inhale where an exhale should be, matched perfectly to her rhythm, as if it had found the loop and wanted to show it to her. The body knew the trick at a level the head could not narrate. The neck prickled and the eyes stung and the hands curled, remembering moss and the texture of something that wasn't bark sliding under the skin. She stopped it at the last minute because she didn't want to know how it ended. Because endings are doors, and she did not want to make another into the room. She saved the file. She did not rename it. She unplugged the recorder, wrapped it in a towel, and put it in the oven. A stupid choice, an instinct for boxes within boxes. She left it there for 3 days and did not cook, ate from cartons, drank at the sink, turned the news up too loud. Her name comes easily through apartment walls. People say it on the street. Baristas say it with daylight in their voice. She avoided it as long as she could, and then she slipped once and set it into her bathroom mirror to prove to the house that it belonged to her still. The first echo of it came from her mouth. The second came soft as fog from somewhere near the ceiling, as if the forest had taught the air here how to behave. There is a reason people tell stories, even when stories cost them sleep. It's how you make a fence in the head. She told this one out loud to a friend who didn't believe in machines or places that learn you. And they sat on a city bench while buses groaned and a kid played loud music on a phone. And she explained what a weave sounds like, and how names are fragile, and why breath is a door you open and close all day, without thinking. The friend asked if she had fiddled with the audio, if she had layered something in without noticing, if she had worked too long in headphones before this, and her brain had grown a new shadow. Sensible questions. She said yes to some, and no to others. Then, because the mind loves proof the way animals love burrows, she offered the headphones and the last 10 minutes of the Thursday file. The friend listened with eyebrows lifted in polite expectation. At minute 56, the friend's shoulders stiffened a small degree and remained at that angle. At the end, the friend took the headphones off carefully and looked down at them like someone looking at a stiff drink they don't remember ordering. "I heard someone call you," the friend said, and used her name. And the way the sound hung in the city air made the bench feel less solid. "It's Rain," she said. "It's your brain." "That's what I thought," the friend said, "until the part where it said it with your breath." The next day, she mailed the recorder to a P.O. box she'd set up for giveaways. No address, no return. Just an object without a context, floating through the system that moves the world's things from hand to hand. It's not a solution. Solutions are for problems. This was a door. Maybe all she did was move it, but that felt like an act with a different intent than locking. She took the files off her laptop and onto a drive she kept in a drawer. She taped shut and she wrote a note on the drawer that said, "Not tenderly. Do not." That night, in a city where tires hissed on wet streets and someone laughed below her window and a neighbor coughed, she slept. At 3 a.m, in a dream or in a room, something leaned near enough to her ear that she felt the presence of shape without contact. And in the space of her exhale, said a name that wasn't hers. It said, the one she doesn't use. The one from childhood that belongs to only 3 people in the world and a place she hasn't been back to in years. It's not what frightened her. What frightened her was that the voice had finally found the syllable that belongs to her like breath does, and that it learned it without asking, and that the air took it from her mouth so gently she didn't even feel the theft. She woke before the end of the exhale and didn't finish it. She pulled it back into herself like a line. She lay there in the dark and didn't say a word. She learned to let breath pass through without making a door. She learned to carry quiet like a stone in her pocket. She learned a piece of the hoe had traveled home tucked into her ribs and would have to be negotiated with, softly, the rest of her life. You come for the elk in late September, when the river braids itself pale and the fog sits low, and the forest feels like it's holding its breath for a show older than roads. The hoe has a way of making big things quiet. But the rut isn't one of them. A bull's bugle unzips the valley and puts a raw metal edge in the air that makes the hair lift on your arms, even if you've never heard one before. Rangers warn that this is the dangerous time. Antlers lowered, eyes locked, bulls pacing like magnets, repelling each other. And you treat the signs as gospel, even as the sound pulls you off the main trail toward the gravel bars where voices like that come from. There's nothing supernatural about a 1,000-pound animal deciding you are a problem. You tell yourself that again as the bugle rips across the fog, a high wire pulled tight, then drops into a coarse chuckle that feels like a laugh aimed at smaller mammals. The river is milk gray with glacial silt, hurrying but wide and shallow where you break out of the trees. And the stones along the bar are slick enough that you plant your feet, like you're about to be judged for balance. Across the water, cows collect in a loose group the way nervous ideas do, ears swiveling, bodies drifting in unison, when something unseen drags the group's focus. A big-bodied bull stands up valley, neck darkened, mane matted from wallows, the kind of animal that makes distance feel like a suggestion. He lifts his head, and the next bugle carries down the channel like a blade scraped along a length of pipe, a sound that sends a small panic into your stomach even as your mind labels it beautiful. You keep the respectful space the regulations ask for. Too many stories of people caught flat-footed by an animal that can pivot faster than you can think. And you plant yourself behind a driftwood root the size of a small car and let the performance do what it does every year until winter slams the door on it. Another bull answers from unseen country downriver, the pitch a little brighter, the vibrato thinner. And you understand in your body why the cows keep turning like weather vanes. The big bull's head swings, antlers fletched with alder leaves and wet grass, and he steps into the current the way a sure thing moves. Not careful, just efficient. The water piles against his chest and fans away in sheets. And when he climbs onto the bar near your side, he shakes himself, and the spray comes off him in an arc like a thrown net. Your heart climbs without asking. The advice says, make distance if a bull closes your space. Pick a tree. Put something between you and an animal designed to push problems aside with bone. You don't move yet because movement attracts attention, and because the driftwood root is a poor shield. But it is a line you understand. A thing you can touch that feels like rule. The bullseye catches the fog-filtered light, and for a moment, you get that human mistake where you think an animal is deciding in words. It doesn't need words. It lowers its head a fraction and paws once. A raw scrape that exposes wet stone and throws up a spray of silt. And the sound is an edit in the river's constant sentence that makes you swallow. You curse the fog, then love it. It hides you, and it hides everything else equally. And the valley becomes a set of silhouettes moving in a white room. The cows fold away like smoke, and the bigger bull moves to pin them with his presence, bugling again, the noise a knife through cloth. The challenger you haven't seen yet lifts his voice from the far end of the bar, closer than before, and the second sound tilts the air with a competing claim. They don't always collide, you've read. Sometimes the sound and posture do the work. Sometimes a smaller bull learns the shape of losing and drifts off to find luck later. That's the plan your body writes into your bones as the second bull materializes through the fog like a ship becoming a fact. Not as heavy in the shoulders, cleaner antlers, eyes burning with the kind of heat that belongs to things that haven't yet paid in scars. He plants and rakes the ground as if to pull the river to him. And the two voices for a moment come so close together that you can't tell which throat is cutting the valley and which one is answering. You take 2 slow steps back, and the stones shift under your boots in that treacherous way river rock has, slicked with the finest possible mud, made to look like terra firma until you ask it a question. Your heel slides to the edge of a pale patch that looks like sand, but behaves like a trick. The hoe carries ground in its blood. Glacier flour and timber, whole logs casual as twigs. And the bars hide pockets where water moves under a skin and waits for a foot. The crust holds until it doesn't. Your boot drops 6 inches and then another 6, and the river's skin climbs your ankle as if interested. You lunge forward and it holds you 1 elastic, means second longer than it should, as if something soft is jealous and wants you. It's only silt doing what silt does. Panic writes wrong names on things. You rip free with a sound like a slow kiss and stumble toward the driftwood as the bulls close the last of their fog distance. When antlers meet, the valley hears it. It's not Hollywood. It's wood on bone and the heavy grunt of something giving weight to a problem. The big bull drives first, head angled, massive shoulder pushing, and the younger one gives ground on the slick stones with a scuffle that sprays the fog close to their knees. They lock and twist, hooves finding purchase, hooves not finding it, a dance built to be watched by cows and kept clear of idiot primates. You make yourself smaller against the root, rain pattering on your hood, eyes trying to do 2 jobs at once. Watch the animals because they are a live, dangerous story. And watch the edges of fog for any cow that will choose your slice of bar as the safe path away. You don't want to be between anything and its choice. The big bull's breath makes a visible heat in the fog when he blows, and a sound comes out of him that isn't the famous call, but a hoarse, domestic noise, the kind of sound an engine makes when it's working too hard. He drives the smaller bull across the lip of the bar and into shallow water, and the current gets a grip on their legs, and the twist of bone and muscle becomes something new and stupid. A fight in a conveyor belt. They break, clash again, and the smaller one does what smaller things do when they are smart. He disengages while his feet still know which way is floor, and he turns that energy into motion that isn't retreat so much as reallocation. He runs, not past the cows, but down the bar, bugles once more as if to remind the valley that he isn't humiliated, and disappears into a thicker smear of white. Silence after violence is different from the hoe's ordinary quiet. The river keeps speaking, but the space where the other voice was becomes a negative that the ear can't stop filling in. The big bull stands with his ribs moving hard, dark mane and damp ropes, antlers freckled with pale scratches from old wars and alder scars from new ones. He lifts his head as if to bless the bar with normal again. and one of the cows answers by doing something domestic and perfect. She puts her head down and chews. The world tries to settle. That's when the big bull rotates and chooses the same line of stones you chose to make his way back to his group, which puts 3,000 pounds of intention and bone and speed on a path that passes within a car length of your poor excuse for cover. You don't move, because movement is a piece of punctuation. An animal like this reads with a different alphabet. And because there is nowhere sensible to go that isn't between somebody and somebody's plan. You lower your head without meaning to, the way people do under power lines. He sees you. Of course he does. The dark eye cuts 1 inch and lands on the fact of a human making itself narrower behind wood that fell before your grandparents were born. The head dips that fraction again. Not a charge yet, not even a threat, but the acknowledgement that his valley has an uninvited variable. And his front hoof cuts a crescent in the silt that fills with water immediately. The sound he makes is not cinema. It's a short, pressed breath that says, move. You don't run. You don't raise your arms. You slide 1 pace deeper behind the root so that the mass of it makes you a quieter problem. His ear flicks. The cows watch him. The fog thickens a degree, as if the sky wants to erase you and can't quite. He decides without drama that you are not the question today. He lifts, swings, and moves along the bar, with a weight that makes the stones adjust in slow aftershocks behind him, joining his cows like a king returning to a table that was never in doubt. You stay until your nervous system stops yelling in your teeth. The river makes its argument. The fog loosens its hold enough that a tree line becomes a collection of individual trees again instead of a wall. You back out the way a person leaves a church they didn't mean to enter, grateful and angry and a little raw, no miracle except the kind that looks like ordinary life continuing. At the trail, the green swallows you differently. You aren't prey anymore. You're a bystander walking out of a town square after a public fight. You pass a sign that reminds you, with icons and a polite imperative, to give elk 100 yards, and your mind counts the distance you kept like a child, as if good behavior is a shield that works against physics. The bugle that rises behind you a few minutes later is not meant for you, but you feel its edge anyway, and it trims a thin sliver off your composure that won't grow back today. Back at the car, the valley's noise turns into human noise fast. Doors, laughter, a thermos uncapping, a map being unfolded with the special irritation paper makes when it's damp. You hang your muddy boot by a lace and dig out a towel, hands shaking a little, not from fear but from having been inside something honest and heavy. People ask where the elk are. You point downriver and say you heard them, which is true. You don't say you felt the sound in your soft parts like a metal flavor. You look at your hands and think about the pale patch that grabbed your boot and how easy it is to mistake a crust for a floor. You think about 1,000 pounds choosing not to be interested in you and how thin that line was. 3 seconds of eye and a hoof's short scrape. And how in a different story, with a different person, or no driftwood route, or a different mood in the animal, the valley would have told a louder truth. Then you drive out with the windows cracked to let the river's cold breath clean you. And when a new bugle rips the fog back where the trees open, you don't slow down. You hold the wheel like a promise you're keeping. You hear about the cabin from a ranger who doesn't call it a cabin. He calls it the old guard station up valley, 9 miles on foot along the Hoh River Trail, a rectangle of logs built in the 1930s that still looks the way it did when horses tied up and radios crackled like campfires. He mentions it casually when you ask about day hikes past the Hall of Mosses and Spruce Trail, the ones everyone does. If you go that far, he says, You'll pass the meadow and the shed and the shelter that replaced the one the tree crushed in the 70s. It's nothing dramatic, just a place that reminds you people used to live out there longer than a shift. The way he says it makes you picture a room that remembers names. You leave early because 9 miles in a damp valley always feel longer than 9. The river keeps its voice low, the forest absorbs your footfalls, and the trail holds a rhythm you can teach your breath to follow. The first hours have the friendliness of signage and familiar loops. Small maps with tasteful fonts telling you where you are and how far to go before a footbridge and a creek. Past the places with gloss, the tread narrows and the green folds in, and then it opens to what the ranger must have meant. A meadow that reads like a pause in a sentence. A piece of sky pressed down onto grass for animals to consider. Just beyond it, the station sits as if a hand set it there carefully a long time ago. Log walls, shake roof, a geometry that looks stubborn against the moss. You feel the human scale immediately. A door the size of your shoulder width. Windows like eyes that don't blink. A porch that wants to be sat on by someone in wet socks. You're not trespassing. That matters. The guard station is still used part of the year for exactly what its title says, and the sign near the door is not a keep-out, but a reminder of its function. Residence, contact point, a piece of park history that still earns its keep. The door is secured. You wouldn't try it even if it weren't. You circle in the way people do around old human things, not touching first. Eyes doing the inventory that hands will want to repeat. The notches in logs where corners are married, the iron of the hinges, the way the shakes on the roof have weathered into a fur of silver and brown. There's a shelter nearby, open on one side, the modern inheritor of an older line of structures that used to be spaced out like beads along these routes. You step into its shade, and the smell of packed dirt and old smoke and wet wood folds over you. And even though all you see is a table and a bench, the air has the shape of company. You decide to wait. The sun is a rumor more than a reality in a place that wears clouds like a second canopy. But the meadow has a clear light that feels like permission to sit. You take off your pack and lean against the shelter's inside wall, and imagine what a long night sounds like when you are the only human voice for miles. Old stations aren't haunted in the way people make jokes about. They are haunted by work. Meals cooked, boots dried, lists made, storms counted. The hose quiet presses its palm against old wood and takes an imprint. And later, on days like this, it gives it back. You hear hooves in your head before you hear them in the meadow, a uniform tapping, then a tearing sound as teeth pull at grass. Elk, the valley's weather. You stay small and still. You've read the rules. And besides, watching something that belongs here operate without needing you is a better use of a morning than most problems people invent. The first odd thing is a smell that doesn't match the day. It's not rot and not rain and not wood smoke. It's soap. Not the complicated kind with botanicals and marketing words, but that plain bar smell that screams sink in a building with a mirror tacked to the wall. It drifts through the shelter as gently as a person walking by. And if there had been someone walking by, you would have heard the gravel crunch or the boards complain. You think about the station's interior, bunk, stove, a narrow shelf, and wonder if the ranger is in residence, if there's a routine you're hovering at the edge of. You step to the doorway and look toward the station. The windows hold the meadow. Nothing else moves. The smell lingers just long enough to decide it's real, and then fades the way a person can move through a room and take their heat with them. The second odd thing feels like memory being placed, not recovered. You sit again, and the shelter wall at your back translates your pulse into wood. You close your eyes because the day asks for it, and when you open them, someone has sat opposite you at the table. Not a person, an arrangement. The surface shows damp circles as if a cup was set down, then moved, then set down again. The circles are not there. Then they are, already drying, and your throat makes a sound you don't recognize. A short laugh that isn't a laugh. The air holds a cooler line across your shins, as if someone's knees under the table moved the air and forgot to move the dust motes with it. You tell yourself a narrative that fits the world. Rangers use this place. Water condenses. Shapes happen. You stick to the narrative until it lets you breathe. A voice would be a relief, even a distant one. What comes instead is the small report of a hinge that remembers, from inside the station's log walls. It's the sound doors make when they decide to open into rooms that need them. Then silence again, the meadow's polite, endless breath. Your body misreads silence as consent to leave. You shoulder your pack because moving while you are still calm is better than moving later because you have to. As you step out from the shelter, the station's front door is exactly as it was. Closed, secured, unremarkable. But the curtain in the nearest window has shifted, a subtle tilt in the fabric, like a held breath being released. The window glass does what window glass does best. Shows you a version of the meadow behind you. Nothing else? You take the trail again, meaning to put a few miles under your boots, and then turn back with the satisfaction of a thing reached and the humility the valley teaches freely. The forest takes you in the way it does people who don't argue with it. No spectacle, just a recalibration of scale. And the guard station becomes a thought 2 turns back instead of an object around the bend. The third odd thing is not subtle. Somewhere behind you, from the direction of the meadow, comes the sound of a bucket being set down hard on wooden planks. It's a noise with a human story baked into it. It triggers a picture you did not put in your head. A person, call them a ranger if you need the word, coming up the steps with wet hands and a wet sleeve and a routine, dropping weight into a container whose handle has a shape memorized into their palm. Your feet stop as if the trail had ended. You don't turn. There's no rule that says turning is bad luck. There's only the feeling that if you give this anything a face, you'll have to bring it home. You keep walking. The river holds the left side of your body like a hand. The trees hold the right like a wall. The trail passes a patch where wind once had its way, and the blowdown looks like a child's game of pickup sticks in old dimensions. You step over what can be stepped over and go around what can't. When you finally let yourself turn to look back down the seam of trail you've made, the perspective compresses into green and light. There is no person in it, no shadow moving counter to the leaves. You say out loud, for your sake, I'm not staying. The forest edits the words, files them between drip and leaf. Turning back feels like admitting something you aren't prepared to name. You do it anyway because a loop doesn't exist here unless you make it, and because most of what you need is behind you. The car, the ranger who didn't call it a cabin, the version of yourself that doesn't smell soap in the woods. When you reach the meadow again, the guard station looks precisely as it should, but the way your body reads it has shifted a few inches to the left. The porch holds shade that didn't feel like shade earlier. The meadow's softness looks staged, like a backdrop did a better job than the world. You stand in the open like someone waiting to be seen by a house. The urge to step onto the porch is so clean and so irrational that you have to inventory it. You don't step up. You say, thanks, like an idiot thanking a room, because gratitude is a way out you can live with. On the walk out, the valley behaves. Elk are only sign and scent. The river argues with boulders in its low voice. A pair of hikers pass and offer the casual solidarity of people moving through the same green tube. The human world begins to feather back in as trail signs thicken and families in bright rain shells reappear, narrating their own small triumphs. You don't think about the station again until the moment just before the parking lot makes its rude geometry in the trees. It arrives like a misfiled note. You left something on the shelter table. You inventory quickly: stove, bottle, map, hat, and everything is with you. The feeling is not about objects. It is about manner. You left without saying the thing people say when they mean to return. And there's a fragment of a routine, that old, boring, beautiful work of radio checks and lists and doors, that you interrupted by being near it, by allowing it to recognize you as someone who could be part of it. Weeks later, in a different room with a different kind of quiet, you'll be rinsing a coffee mug at a sink when a smell slides through the apartment that doesn't belong to your life. Not your detergent, not your neighbor's cooking. Plain bar soap, the kind that leaves no adjectives in the air. It will pass by you with the same gentle indifference it had out there and drift toward the hallway. And you'll feel an absurd, practical urge to check a door you know is locked. You won't, because you already know how doors work. You'll say again, thanks, to the empty shape of a room that once taught you about work by letting you feel the space a person left behind when they stood up from a table to carry a bucket across a porch in the rain. And you will mean it, and for a minute, the air will feel like a place you're borrowing from somebody reliable. You take the job because you've already said yes to worse kinds of quiet. On paper, it's routine. 3 nights monitoring game cameras on the hoe side, swapping cards, noting elk traffic, making sure winter storms didn't tilt the posts. The park started using these cameras a few seasons back to fill in gaps that helicopters and clipboards can't. And someone has to walk out and collect the proof that elk still wander through the green even when nobody's watching. You sign for the tin box of cards, a little binder, and a radio that works until the valley decides it doesn't. And you drive until the world thins to river sound and moss. The ranger who hands you the keys says the same thing they always say, half warning, half blessing. In there, what you don't hear is as important as what you do. The first day is all legs and logistics. Fog sits low enough that your hat wears a wet rim, and the trail gives you its steady heartbeat. Boardwalk here, roots there, a place where a nurse log has become a small city of thin, earnest trees. The cameras are set where elk actually move, not where tourists hope to see them, which means little openings along game trails, crossings where the gray river fans out and folds back, seams at the edge of meadows where the bodies collect and decide. Each camera is a quiet face on a post with a locked jaw. You kneel, swap the card, make the notation, and for a few minutes, you listen to your own breath like it belongs to somebody desirable. You've read the project notes. They're not trying to count every head anymore, just occupancy, presence, that essential question of, are they here? As of last season, the answer was yes. The cameras say so the way they say everything, in flat, unforgiving honesty. Near an alder that's been shredded at chest height, you spot the first surprise. Not fresh rubs, not scat, but a pile of harebell blue ribbons knotted into a low cedar branch like someone's idea of luck. They're the kind of survey flags crews use to mark lines and corners, exactly the kind you're carrying in your pack to re-tag a camera the river might have pushed sideways. These aren't yours. The knot is tidy, not the work of wind. Maybe another crew left them. Maybe a volunteer with an old bag of markers decided to bless a trail. You make a note because notes are fences. Blue flags at camera 12, unknown origin. And move on. The radio checks fine, then fuzzes, then comes back with a click that's more reassuring than a voice. That night, in a bunkhouse with a leaky corner and a baseboard heater that knows your moods, you do what the job secretly asks you to do. You look. You slide the new cards into the laptop and let the thumbnails multiply like cells. The forest's honesty is brutal in stills. Elk at night with eyes blown white by the flash, a cow's shoulder blurring as she takes a step, a calf a week into legs, a coyote halfway between decisions, a heavy bull in steam. Tab through time at the speed of your finger. You get humans too sometimes. A group with rain shells too bright, a solo hiker moving like they remembered something behind them, a hat brim and a chin. On card 7, the valley tells a stranger truth. It's an elk frame because it's always an elk frame. A cow crossing a path of wet leaves, head turned, tail neutral. Behind her, in the slot between two cedars, stands something that at first you call a trick of lichen and shadow, because sanity prefers those words. Tall, narrow, the kind of vertical that this place is full of. Except it isn't just a tree, because the edges aren't bark, they're cloth. Not patterned, not camo. Not any fabric you can name. But the matte look of something that drinks light. The frame after shows the same slot empty. The cow's tail lifts, a ghost of tension caught in the quarter second the camera took to think. You go back and forth, making the pixels tell you different stories. They don't. You tell yourself it's a hooded person who slipped the detection cone. You tell yourself it's a rain-blurred snag. You don't say the other word because the valley makes it sound like you're 12 if you try. Morning puts you back under the canopy with a fine headache and a stubborn unwillingness to glance between trees. Camera 12 has tipped, which is ordinary. Wind, elk, people who don't realize they are big in a small place. You straighten it with cold fingers and sight down the line it watches. The blue flags you noted yesterday have multiplied, tied at ankle height all the way off the main trail into a run of dimness where elk definitely move. They guide the eye with a confidence that's almost polite. You follow 3, then 5, promising yourself you'll stop at 10, because 10 is a number that makes sense. At flag 11, the valley edits a jet out of the sky so completely that the silence feels physical, like an object pressed into your ear. The flags end at a curve of the hoe where the water takes a breath and the gravel is firm. On a drift log, there's a tin the size of a cigar box, the exact model you've been swapping in and out of cameras for 2 days. It's not yours. The lid isn't locked. The decision to open it is the easiest bad decision you've made in a while. Inside, 4 SD cards and sleeves, a folded paper rain-spotted to translucence, and a flat stone the size of a palm painted lip red, like a marker you've seen photographs of on blogs about quiet. The paper carries coordinates that put a point about 3 miles up trail, and a note that looks like no one you know wrote it. If they're on yours, they're on mine. Watch 2:13 a.m., Elk Crossing. It's signed with nothing but a drawn square with a dot in it. You know the symbol even if you've never met the man who made it famous. In this valley, you're never more than a story away from him. You pocket the cards because this is your job. Close the tin because this is not. And walk out with the feeling you've picked up a thing that doesn't like to be moved. Back in the bunkhouse, you slide one of the stranger cards into the laptop, the one labeled 213 in a pencil that presses hard. The first files are ordinary and beautiful in their flat way. Elk ghosting through fog, trunks silvered by flash, rain made into lines. At 2:13, a herd crosses. Cows, calves, a ragged edge. The camera catches the last calf hesitating, returning, then hurrying to catch up. After it passes, a hole in the picture doesn't fill with a tree. It fills with a vertical, thin presence that wasn't caught in the frame before, that wasn't a branch, that wears the forest the way a person wears a coat. The air around it looks heavier in the cheap light. The frame after is empty again. The one after that shows nothing but a ripple in the leaves, as if a body passed without touching. You pause at the calf's hesitation, because that's the only part that feels like science. Animals feel pressure we don't. They know when a hallway has a new smell. It feels like science until it doesn't. Radio checks with bass are usually comfort food. Today, you use the call to steady your hands and to hear another human. You mention flagged trails you didn't place and an unsecured box. Bass is a familiar voice, practical, a cup of coffee you can drink. Other crews working that side, they say. Fog's thick. Log what you find. Don't bring back anything that isn't ours. You don't say you already did. You don't say the word that would turn the conversation into another thing. You thank them and hear the small click that means the line agrees with you. On the last night, the valley goes still in that way that makes you put your hand on your own chest for the comfort of moving parts. You dream like a person who's let the green get into their blood. Long corridors of trees, water running under skin, animals moving with news. When the knock comes, it's not at a door. It's inside the room the way sound can be. 3 slow raps that have weight and expectation. You lie there with the cheap heater's tick filling up one ear and the knocks filling the other. And you realize it's just rain stepping off the eave onto a loose gutter. You fall asleep thinking about how easily the mind gives intention to physics when it's been too long in a place that edits jets out of the sky. You leave at first light because you've learned to let jobs end when they say they're over. The trail out is the same, and not at all. The way routes feel when you walk them as one person and return as another who knows a new fact. At the visitor center, you put the tin and the cards you shouldn't have into a manila envelope with a note that says only, "Found." You sign your name to the log and turn in your radio and accept the joke the desk ranger makes about your boots being half the hoe by weight. You drive. And the moment the valley lets go of your car, the world rushes in like a rude friend. You think about red stones and blue flags and 4 frames where trees wore clothes. And you tell yourself names until the urge passes. Weeks later, a wildlife tech forwards a handful of stills with a shrugs in the subject line. The email is the kind people send when they want to be dismissive and can't quite manage it. The photos are from a different drainage, but the same season. Quinoa this time, not ho. But the forest is family, and the rules are cousins. 2 elk in a hallway of spruce. Between them, a blur that insists on being more than water. Compression artifact? The tech writes. Shadow? Trick? You answer in park language that is both honest and safe. Animals alter movement in the presence of unknown stimuli. Camera data shows occupancy. Unusual frames don't constitute evidence. You attach a crop that proves nothing. You hit send. Then you close the laptop and sit with a valley in your chest where a quiet square holds because someone chose it. And with the memory of animals building their lives under a ceiling that sometimes wears a coat. You don't come here for answers. You come for the kind of quiet that makes questions rearrange themselves. 2 friends call it an investigation to make the drive feel official. But really, it's an excuse to camp near the river and see if that story about the pond is anything more than a rumor. The rumor is simple and dumb like most good ones. There's a shallow pool off the main trail that doesn't reflect what's in front of it, only what's behind. Of course it isn't true. Of course it is exactly the kind of thing people say into a place that already edits the world down to water, wood, and breath. Still, you print a little map that shows the boot path toward the quiet stone and pack a cheap recorder because leaving it home would feel like superstition. The hoe accepts the car with its usual indifference, and the first 100 yards erase more noise from your head than a week of sleep does. The pool is not marked. Nothing here worthy of the word legend is ever marked. But when the trail folds toward a low patch, and the ground slickens, and the green deepens into a darker register, you feel the body's small flinch that knows water even when the eyes don't. It's the size of a king mattress in a long winter. Alder leaves rim it like coins, and the surface is perfectly wrong. Too still with the river so close, a plate of ash glass laid on a table. You set the recorder on your pack, because rituals ask to be performed, and say nothing because names in a place like this are invitations, and you don't have a guest list anymore. The air smells like iron and fern, and the kind of sweet rot that makes soil generous. When you kneel and the water finds you in its eye, you brace for your face to look back warped by a story you don't want. It doesn't. It shows the trail bending behind you, the opening into the trees you came through, and the absence of both of you kneeling. It doesn't show you at all. There are a dozen explanations that won't make you laugh if you say them quickly. Angles, film of pollen, a skin of water that takes sky better than bodies. But none of them apply in the clean way science likes. Your friend shifts to block more light, and the pond obliges by showing a narrower picture of the trail behind that still refuses your shapes. When a couple passes on the main path, their voices slide through the ferns like two bright fish. The pool offers the gap they leave, not the people making it. You don't touch the water because the body knows not to break surfaces that are behaving strangely. You nudge a leaf with a stick and watch the circles widen across a picture of nothing in a room where something is kneeling very close. The recorder's little red eye stares and does its job for a world that doesn't need proof. Sunlight is a rumor here, but the canopy opens enough for the pool to grow a lighter layer for a few minutes. And in that layer, the picture becomes clearer. Trail, gap, a darker seam between two spruces that reads as a hall. You lean and the seam holds while your body becomes air. It's precisely the kind of trick that makes you angry, because anger is how the animal mind protects itself when its map rewrites underfoot. The two of you decide to leave, and the pool decides differently. The image of the trail behind thickens, as if the path were drawing closer without movement. And in that drawn path, in the precise place where your bodies should be standing, a set of wet footprints appears on the reflected dirt. Not yours. Your boots are planted in moss and patience, but unmistakable. Heel, tread, toe, a staggered pair as if someone just stepped up to the edge of water that refuses to admit them. The prints are crisp in the reflection and non-existent on the actual trail. Panic won't help because panic never has posture here. The forest eats it and gives you back a worse version. You don't run. You do what people do when they want to control fear. You make a list out loud of what is happening. You describe the footprints in the reflection and the lack of them in the dirt and the way the pond's surface takes wind differently than the ferns do. A calm plate in a room that is moving. Your friend says your name, and the pool adds a second set of wet prints lined up with the first, closer now to the water's edge. Your names, said aloud, don't enter the reflection. You learn something plain and useful in that second. It wants you to speak, not because it needs to know who you are, but because your mouth is a door you open when you say the truth about yourself. You shut it. Backing away means nothing here unless the water agrees. You step one pace, and the reflection step matches. Wet tread marks kissing the line where moss meets dirt in the picture, while your actual world remains unmarked. The recorder clicks once, like a small animal clearing its throat. You hate it for behaving like itself. Your friend reaches for your sleeve and his fingers hesitate in that human way that admits belief without giving it language. The pool shows no hands. The pool shows only the dirt behind you, accepting a presence that isn't consenting to be named. When the wind moves above the canopy and a low, wide sound lays over the forest like a sheet, the pond ignores it and keeps a clean sky in its coin, which is when you understand exactly how much it is editing. You decide not to go backward or forward. You decide to go sideways the way crabs refuse nets. You pick a line around the edge that keeps you in ferns and out of mirror, and you take it slowly, watching your footing, letting the world narrow all the way down to ankles and leaves. The pond's picture rotates as if it's on a mount, following the button of your bodies across its own logic. In the reflection, the prints leave the trail and step into moss that shouldn't hold them. You keep moving until a rotted stump interposes between you and the water like a kind bouncer. And only then do you risk a longer glance. The surface is just that, surface, showing a quiet, empty path and a soft mouth of trees, and yourself at last, two people pressed flat in a liquid eye, pale and serious and small. It's almost worse. Later you argue about whether the pond wanted names or only attention. You argue about whether it learned your shapes and then tried your steps, about whether the valley has places that act like low mirrors for whatever passes, not trapping it so much as holding it the way a memory holds a smell. You pack the recorder without replaying because sometimes proof removes the only safety you have left: doubt. You walk the main trail like citizens among citizens, nodding at families, answering where the elk are with a shrug that doesn't betray the idea that something with no mouth tried to mouth you. You don't look back because you want to go home as the person you arrived as. The forest is polite enough to allow the lie for a few miles. At camp that night, the river gives you its indifferent lullaby and the trees play their old wet song. And sleep comes with the heavy hands it uses on people who've been wound too tight. You wake just once, to the sound of a single drop hitting canvas with the weight of a boot. You listen for the second, count to 10, and it doesn't come. Your friend says your name in the small voice of people who don't want to wake predators that don't exist, and you decide for both of you. You won't say anything back until morning. The recorder sits in the vestibule and whirs gently to itself, too honest for your good. Weeks later, in a bathroom with city tile and a mirror that tells no truths beyond the cruel ones, you lean over the sink and the faucet coughs air before it gives water. In that half-second, the metal shows the open doorway behind you and a strip of hallway, and not the person bent close with two hands on porcelain. The reflection corrects itself so quickly you could lie about it, even to yourself. You don't. You turn and stand in the empty frame and keep your mouth closed and breathe through your nose like a swimmer who knows the pool better than the pool knows them. You say nothing for the count of 10 and then a little longer. The water runs, ordinary and clean and bright. You keep the recorder in a drawer and decide not to listen to what it took, because every door doesn't have to be walked through. Some can be watched until they stop being doors and go back to being water. And some can be left in a forest that happily forgets you as soon as you step out of it. You don't tell anyone about the sleepwalking, not at first. It starts small on the second night. Waking with your face against damp nylon and the peculiar shame of finding your body at the tent door with no memory of getting there. You're solo on the Hoe, a spot the ranger called calm and close to the river. The ground padded by moss so thick it makes sleep feel medicinal. You went to bed at a normal hour, head full of the day's long green, the river's low voice, the hidden white of elk ribs in a thicket where something fed in winter. You wake at 2:17 a.m. the kind of time a brain invents when it wants to be precise. To the smell of cedar and the thin trickle of damp along your hairline, and you think, sit up, close the fly, drink water. You do those things, and then you sleep again, convincing yourself morning will make the night a joke. Morning is a map of what you did. Footprints circle the tent in half moons, a confused choreography pressed into the moss. Your tread pattern stamped over itself in ways that make your stomach feel like the river when it hits a rock. There is a groove where your heel dug, a smear where you pivoted, a tight series of steps leading to a cedar with a low burl and then back, twice, as if your body touched the tree and returned to check something and then couldn't decide what. You tell yourself animals could do this, that elk and raccoons have taken to faking boots for content. And then you crouch and place your own boot in the print, and it fits the way your hand fits your pocket. You promise not to sleep with the fly cracked again. You promise to zip the inner door all the way and thread the tabs together. Promises feel like locks, and locks are a way to pretend a forest respects plastic teeth and thin zippers. You fill the day with rational acts because daylight begs for that kind of faith. You hike a loop that people with toddlers hike. Boardwalk and interpretive signs, pictures of nurse logs, and the word epiphyte pronounced politely in 1,000 mouths. You stop at a place where the air goes colder for no reason and watch fog unspool from the river in a silver scarf. And you let the quiet be what it's meant to be here. An intact thing you are allowed inside. You read warnings about food storage and distance from elk, and remember a line about how sleep deprivation in wild places does most of the hurting you'll do to yourself. You think about foxfire and the way some rot glows, about how a forest can make light without flame, and you steer your brain toward fungi and away from mouths. That evening, you make a list in your notebook so that the writing of it feels like a fence. Zip the fly. Tie the inner pulls. Tuck shoes inside. Keep water bottle within reach. Pee before bed. Do not drink after 9. You write, do not say your name out loud if you wake afraid, a rule you don't have a reason for, but add because it seems like the kind of sentence people who have lived past certain nights claim. Helped. You eat without appetite, a normal dinner on the damp edge of normal, and the river handles the talking you don't want to do inside your head. There's a cedar near camp with a gnarled burl like a knuckle, the sort of tree that seems capable of deciding it's a person in the right light. At dusk, the burl carries a faint bruise of color. Not glow, not trick, just the way wood holds day for an extra minute in its cracks. You tell yourself everyone sees shapes. Sleep comes hard and then all at once. When it leaves, it does it brutally. You rise from it like someone dragged you, your knees already under you and your hand already on the zipper tab. The tent is full of gray, that pre-dawn clarity that makes edges honest, and the nylon is cold under your bare palm. You haven't unthreaded the tabs. You are tugging them as if they'd yield to will. Your name comes from outside the fabric, not spoken, but formed the way breath fogs glass. It hits the tent and spreads thin, syllables disappearing as they try to be air. You let go of the zipper. Your other hand has the flat weight of your headlamp in it, and you haven't turned it on. You look at the shadow of your own shoulder and decide not to add light to a room designed to function without it. The smell comes next. Cedar and wet mineral and something sweet like clean rot. The scent of a cut that happened decades ago and is still being finished. Your mouth fills with the taste of sleep and you swallow it down like a pill. You lie back on your pad and pretend you're calm because a body will sometimes believe any story told in a low enough voice. The river does its low, wide sentence. A drip hits canvas with the indecent weight of a fingertip and doesn't repeat. Time fails to move. You breathe in counts, 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, and somewhere in the count, a sound answers your exhale with a smaller one, as if a child at the edge of your bed is practicing breath to match yours. You open your eyes wider than is useful, and the tent behaves like a tent, which is either mercy or a trick. At morning, the prints are new choreography written over the first. They are more assured. The little steps to the cedar happen in straighter lines, a path the body has voted on now. The bark where the burrow lives is dark with damp in a hand-shaped patch, as if someone held it last night for balance. 5 fingers spread, thumb half missing, the way your own hand looks if you press it and lift too quickly. You press your hand against the wet spot and feel ordinary cold, the kind that belongs to wood. You take a photo and delete it without looking. You drink coffee bitter enough to push your pulse around, and each swallow feels like a decision you're making on behalf of the morning. You decide to put your boots inside your bag that night, to remove rotes. You decide to thread the zipper tabs and then tie a second knot in the cords themselves, something hushed and stupid and satisfying. You move the tent 2 yards because distance that small can feel like changing planets when fear is measuring. You consider breaking camp and driving until the trees thin and the river's voice becomes a story you tell yourself at a stoplight. You decide not to because leaving angry teaches nothing. You go to the cedar at noon and put your palm on the burl the way you might let a horse smell you. The wood is nothing but wood. A beetle pushes sawdust out of a seam like a tiny chimney. A beam of sun finds a patch of moss and makes theater out of nothing. The third night, you wake on your feet. There is no transition. Your body is hinged at the ankle and already moving when your mind climbs into it. The tent zipper is still threaded, and you are standing at it like a person waiting at a locked door to be let out by someone on the other side. You can taste your own sleep breath. It has a bitter, old penny metallic edge that feels borrowed. Your name approaches the tent a second time and almost holds shape. It fails charmingly at the last second, like a person trying to blow a bubble with gum that's lost its sugar. You say nothing back. You stand and your head invents a picture of the cedar as it must look right now. Its burl glowing faintly the way some rot glows, foxfire color, a bruise of blue-green in the dark. You promise yourself you won't check. You fail. Outside, the world is not light, but it isn't black. The river lifts a gray that the canopy spills back. The cedar is a body in that strange middle. The burl has a color to it you can't catch. You see it when you look away and lose it when you try to stare. The exact trick of bioluminescent fungi you've read about and never seen. If you cup your hand near it without touching, the hairs on your wrist rise as if a voltage is present in the damp itself. You place your palm on the wood, and it is cold and slick and almost indecently soft for a living thing. Your name is nowhere in the air. There is only your breath and the river and a quiet that feels participatory rather than empty. The next morning, the prints end at the cedar and don't return to the tent. Your mind, helpful, insistent, suggests you were carried. You check for drag marks that don't exist. You wait for outrage to arrive, and when it doesn't, you realize outrage depends on a belief in violation. And what you feel is a weirder thing. Collaboration. You didn't consent to that, nonetheless feels like something finished that wanted finishing. You pack. You leave the campsite the way you found it, because that's the rule. And because erosion isn't only for rivers. At the edge of the loop, a pair of hikers asks whether the haul of moss is worth it. You say yes with more certainty than you earned. Not because of what's on the loop, but because you have learned about rooms that ask nothing, and take what you bring and hand a piece of it back, polished into a story you can almost live with. At home, the first few nights are without a vent, and then the fourth is not. You wake with your feet tangled in the sheet near your bedroom door, your hand on the deadbolt you never lock, Your eyes wet the way eyes get when you've been concentrating too hard on something just out of sight. You move back to the bed and sit there like a kid who's climbed out of a window and climbed back in before anyone noticed. You buy a cheap motion camera because proof is a kind of mercy. And in the morning, it shows you. A person rising at 2:17, crossing a room with patience, placing a palm flat on the wood at shoulder height, holding it there, lowering the head as if listening to a low voice. Your palm print on the door is faint and damp in the morning light. And over the next hours it dries from the edges in, a ring fading toward the center the way wet on bark recedes when the day decides to be kind. You don't tell anyone. You move the bed. You set an alarm for 2:15 and sit up before anything else can decide to. You learn to breathe out of time, to hold on the 4 count and exhale on 7, not 6, just to break the loop. You stop saying your name out loud in your own rooms. On some nights, when sleep comes fast and honest and your bones feel borrowed from a better animal, you dream you stand in a forest and place your hand on a cedar that glows just at the edges. And the tree says nothing and takes nothing, and you say nothing and take nothing. And the river introduces the two of you the way a friend introduces two people who don't need more than names to understand why they're in a room together. Then morning comes, and your hand smells like wood and clean rot, and you wash it, and the scent hangs the way moss does after rain. Polite, but not asking permission to remain. The first call hits at 9:13 p.m., the kind that lights the board without context and paints a small square of green on the map with a thin blue thread through it. Coordinates that read like a dare. The Rainforest, a few miles off the visitor center and somewhere along a trail people describe in soft voices afterward because of how the quiet feels on the skin. The line opens on breath, a single syllable that could be help or wind, then goes to a version of nothing that is not a dropped connection so much as something taking the end off sound and keeping it. A dispatcher asks the script true questions in a voice tuned for panic to climb down. Location, number in party, injuries, stay on the line. The answering room is static and nylon rustle and a small tap like a ring against a hard case. And then a silence so complete it makes the ballast hum from the overhead lights sound like an engine running. The coordinate block looks ordinary on a map 1,000 miles from ordinary. Near legal trails, within day hike range, better described by memory than by elevation lines. The timer keeps counting seconds that don't hold words. And just when the instinct to hang up starts to itch, a voice slides under the static and says a name that doesn't match the callback record. A first name said like a question. Then the line cleans itself to 0 again and holds there, as if air has become a wall and the phone is pressed against it, waiting to hear through. The dispatcher builds a ticket with enough to move bodies. Lat, long down to decimals, best ingress, and ETA. And pushes the page to a ranger who is already pulling on a coat because he knows the shape of the river in the dark. He says what they say, when the right answer is a shrug dressed in facts. Trail slick, fog laying down, radios fickle under canopy, loop is popular. People spin themselves in circles where boardwalk becomes dirt and the river chooses a new braid under your feet. At 10:07 p.m., a second call. Different number, same decimals, same breath and static, and that clean subtraction. The dispatch room leans forward. The supervisor steps in not because of ghosts, but because repetition in a place that edits contrails out of the sky deserves two mouths making decisions. The ranger's truck noses into the gravel, then disappears behind curtains of alder the way cars do when the night has the momentum, and the human world is an afterthought. He checks in on the quarter mile with the bored patience of someone who has learned that boredom is proof you're still in control. Boardwalk, spur, junction, the little footbridge over water that thinks it's a problem only in spring. By 10:40 p.m., the third call lands and changes the room. The line opens and delivers 37 seconds of absence. Not dead air. Every line operator knows dead air. But a fullness that replaces sound so completely the dispatcher can hear her own breath inside the headset and takes it off to break the mirror. She starts a stopwatch because sometimes numbers make fear behave, and she watches it climb to the same tick she will see again and again. 37. Click. Normal noise resumes. Out on the trail, the ranger narrates junctions like a prayer, his voice thinning by degrees as if distance can be measured in decibels. He reaches the spur people take toward a small pond that has a joke of a name nobody tells with a straight face. And then his words flatten and stop, as if a hand was placed over the mouth of the radio, gently and with the kind of insistence a mother uses. When his voice returns, it has the wobble people get when they've been asked to stand still in a room that looks empty but isn't. Copy, he says. Fog is thick. Visual is nothing. Trail is sound. And the last two words are louder than necessary, because saying stepping back is how feet remember the choreography. He drops a pin on a device he doesn't entirely trust under 100 feet of wet green, and draws a circle on a paper map with a red pen that will look later like a childish spell, and like a fact in the same breath. He says he'll keep moving in a widening loop along the river's line, because the river argues in the same voice day and night. And the dispatch board shows 11:12, 11:49, 12:26. Each call from that same stamped lat long, each giving the room 37 seconds of impeccably recorded nothing. Morning makes bureaucrats out of everyone because sunlight, even the rumors of it that get past the canopy, turns strangeness into workflow. The log lays out 6 entries, times aligned like spine stitches, each with a coordinate that became a dare. An analyst, calm hands, love of rectangles, highlights the gap length in yellow because highlighting is what the body does in the face of things that refuse narrative. The supervisor writes a cautious note. Multiple calls received, intermittent communications outage encountered by responders, no subjects located, area to be monitored. Visitors advised devices may not function under canopy. It's the right language for a place that has to be honest without starting a fire. 2 rangers go back on first light because pairs are insurance and pride is an injury. They carry a small receiver that turns radio health into little bars that rise and fall and say nothing of substance and everything about luck. At the coordinate, the bars dim one by one like a hallway sensor shutting lights as you walk. And the silence that takes the space of the receiver's busy hiss is not lax so much as a room that decides to close its door with you standing on the threshold. 10 feet back, clear. 8, clear. 6, thin. 4, gone. How many steps is 37 seconds? Depends who's walking. The second ranger marks distances in pencil and wishes the pencil made a dent in whatever membrane he feels his face touching. They stand still and try to hear what's left when the room is taken away. The river's low argument slides in under. Everything like an apology for being the only honest thing moving. A raven scolds with that wet, pipe-wrench cluck. A beetle turns a page in a book made of leaf. Over it all, pressure, the kind of quiet this valley brews like a thick tea. The ranger steps sideways, and the dead zone comes with them for a foot or two, and then lets go, like fog deciding where to sit. They kneel and inspect soil because geology and prank are more comfortable categories than event. The ground gives back cedar duff and the talc of glacial flour. The faint kisses of elk hooves impressed when the forest was wetter. A small slick of standing water that returns only sky to any inquiry about trees. One of them says the obvious thing any adult in a forest should carry like a charm: Woods eat sound. The other answers with the obvious counters. Thermal layers, signal reflection, water-rich air likes to steal radio, canopy turns towers into rumor. Both feel better for having said school out loud. On their way out, a reflective trail marker catches the headlamp and throws a flat eye back, and the first ranger laughs once into the mic. Real laugh, small and human. The room at the console laughs because that's an anchor thrown from one world to another. The story, as stories do, metastasizes poorly online. A thread about the square inch of quiet collects the usual blend of amateurs and experts by intimacy. Coordinates get posted like recipes, then corrected and corrected back, some citing the little red stone on a moss log off the Hoh River Trail. Some insisting the number is wrong here, right there. The truth embedded like a salmon in current. A person who lives within the sound of the river says that even the quietest place is not a guarantee anymore, because growler jets carve their brutal punctuation through the sky when the Navy wants them to. And quiet turns out to be a thing that has to be defended rather than assumed. A local writes that the pond people won't name is a kind of mirror for what stands behind it, and that you should not say names in front of it because names make doors, and water loves doors. The comments find their shape and eat their tail. Back on the board, the calls slow, then stop. 2 weeks hold like plaster. A Tuesday morning brings one more from the coordinate. New area code, same decimals. And the room is calm enough to be bored. The line opens, and the dispatcher sets the stopwatch almost without looking. And the silence fits itself precisely into the 37-second form, as if poured into a mold. The ranger on duty is new enough to be brave and old enough to be cautious. He goes alone out of pride and comes home with humility, which is the preferred direction. At the spot, he does nothing grand. He stands at the imagined border and says in a low voice into the radio what the last guy said, stepping back. He says it for his body as much as for the room. He carries home a map with the circle drawn, not because the circle does anything, but because humans need shapes for fear. He puts it on the wall with a magnet and feels ridiculous and also seen. That night, he wakes at a civilian hour to a version of nothing that he recognizes now not as empty, but as full. And he gets a glass of water in a kitchen where the refrigerator's purr is a gift he can keep, and he laughs once because he understands something that doesn't help. The measurable and the haunted overlap. More often than anyone is comfortable admitting. The dispatcher who took the first 3 calls develops a habit that isn't superstition so much as respect. She marks her calendar with a small circle on days the board did the 37-second trick so she doesn't lie to herself about what her head remembers. On her lunch break, she searches for the project about quiet and reads language she wants to borrow. Sanctuary of silence. Noise-free intervals. The argument that natural quiet is a resource to conserve like dark sky or clean water. She looks at photos of the red stone and moss and wants to believe in objects that behave reliably. She listens to a radio story about the Hoh and flinches when a little prop plane cuts the silence in the recording because even the quietest place comes with footnotes, and footnotes are the honest way to talk about the modern world. None of them, rangers, call takers, techs, turn this into ghost story, not professionally. They talk about canopy attenuation and water content of air and RF propagation under wet biomass. They write memos about visitor expectations of device reliability. They install one more small relay in a place the river will eat next winter and feel better until the first heavy rain. They continue to search trail edges for the obvious things. Lost phone, dropped daypack, anyone who needs their hand, held back to the parking lot's geometry. They find nothing in the way that counts as finding, no subject. They close tickets with the language that keeps peace between the unknown and the ledger. But when they tell it later, privately, to the one friend who doesn't roll eyes at confidence intervals, they include the part that fiction loves because it smells like truth inside a body. That standing on that patch of trail is like standing on the seam between two rooms, and that one room likes to borrow voices for exactly 37 seconds, and that when you step back one pace, the room returns yours like a library book as it says nothing about fines. They mention that a pond under trees can show you the sky and refuse you, and that the forest will allow you to misunderstand it politely for days before it asks for a correction. They say, with an embarrassed smile, that places can have habits and that some of those habits are numbers. One summer afternoon, a volunteer hike leader, cheerful and crisp and full of useful nouns, guides a small group past the junction where the spur to the quiet stone leaves the main trail. In the gap between her words about glacial flower and elk browse lines, she falls silent for 37 seconds without meaning to and resumes on the far edge of the gap without noticing she did it. The group does not register anything beyond the ordinary awe and leg burn. Someone later, looking at fitness app data, notices that for one narrow slice of the trail, their heart rate dropped as if instructed and then resumed climbing. They tell no one because sharing small anomalies invites the wrong kind of conversation, and because some things are better loved than explained. Months pass. Fall leans in. The river fattens. The room takes other calls that cannot be described without names, and the square of green and blue loses its place in the queue. Then the board lights. Same decimals, same quiet. A new dispatcher, trained by the one who marked a calendar in circles, starts the stopwatch without being told. In the kitchen of a small apartment, the old dispatcher wakes, no longer on nights, and stares at a ceiling she has learned to love. For how honestly it returns her gaze. She listens to the building's small human song, pipes and fans, and the brave tendon noise of a neighbor's laugh, and lets the 37 seconds come and go like weather inside a skull. Then she drinks her water and goes back to bed. The valley breathes. The pond keeps its picture straight. The river argues in a low voice about gravity and stones. And somewhere along a section of trail not far from a little red stone on a moss log, a piece of air takes sound into itself, holds it until its number is up, and lets it go without comment, the way a place with rules behaves when no one is watching. You don't plan to stay. You plan to wait out the worst of the rain. That's the lie you tell yourself when the sky opens like a broken faucet halfway down the Ho River Trail, and the air changes from damp to hammered, and you spot an empty campsite tucked under cedar and spruce with a table, a ring of stones, and evidence of an earlier party's impatience, a line of half-burned wood drowned by weather. The forest here can drink 100 inches in a year without flinching, the kind of wet that makes everything grow a second skin. And the downpour that finds you is the kind that alters plans by speaking in a voice too loud to argue with. You duck under the tarp someone left strung between two trees and feel that quick animal relief of being under anything at all in a storm. The rain becomes a wall. The river's steady argument fattens, audible even here, one grove in from the main braid. The world shrinks to the tarp's drip line, the reliable rectangle of the table, and a dim ring beyond where the ferns bow and sway. There are signs of people, but none of them recent. A hot knife smooth slice through wet twine on the table edge. A crushed corner on a box of matches that won't light now even if you beg. A circle on the dirt where a camp stove sat long enough to etch a ring. The fire ring holds the heavy black of drowned coals, the kind that will keep a sour heat for days and then pretend to be dead again. even as the rain tries to persuade the memory out of everything. You set your pack on the driest corner of the table and wring your hat and try to be practical about shelter. String your own line later. Wait 30 minutes now. The forest's rules about time have already begun to shift under the canopy's weight. Minutes feel longer because sound slows them, and the constant percussion persuades you the world has only one job to do. You decide to count to 300 and then make a better choice. You get as far as 60 before the first odd thing happens. A wet footprint appears on the bare dirt near the fire ring, heel first, filling itself from the bottom like a slow pour into a mold. Not yours. Your boots are on your feet. Your feet are under the table. The print is a size and a tread that is not familiar because you aren't paying attention to shoes when panic is still dissolving out of you. You lean forward under the tarp lip, and the print 50-50 dissolves, half filled with water beating and half holding shape like a pressed leaf. A second print follows, offset and angled as if a person is circling, toe pointing in toward the ring. If you look up to find the maker, you have nothing to work with. Rain makes curtains where bodies could be, but there is no human silhouette bending the gray. Your brain offers plausible lies as relief. Drip patterns, leaves falling, water collecting in shapes the mind recognizes. And then you watch 3 prints become 6, each appearing as if someone has stepped down from a place where the rain originates. You call out a plain hello because it's the only dignity the moment allows. The forest eats it, as it eats all human brightness here, and gives you back more water. The prints keep their slow march in 2 tracks around the ring, and the tarp begins to snag and then shrug the heavy beads, releasing them in clumps that hit the table and your sleeves with the rude accuracy of thrown coins. You decide to do something ordinary, because ordinary is a weapon. You take out your stove and cup it in your body to shield it and light it under the tarp's edge. The flame blossoms and hisses in the wet, and for a moment the shelter narrows further to you and a tiny machine that eats fuel and makes heat from a liquid it can protect. The prints circle and stop lines up with the fire ring's opening, the side where a person would face the heat and hold their palms out like a cliché. You pour water into a pot, and it hits the metal with a sound that makes the hair lift along your shoulders because it is a humane sound inside a storm. You magnify it. You make tea. The smell of something warm and tannic is a smaller circle you can step into in your head. It should be nothing. That's the steady drum in your mind, the way the rain is the steady drum in the world. It should be coincidence, an artifact of water and chance. It should be that you've stumbled onto a place where people left without sweeping, and the forest is composting even footfalls. The tea tastes like relief and iron. The prints do a human thing at the edge of vision they have no right to try. They correct their spacing as if the person making them has learned the ring's size and adjusted. You decide that looking long is a kind of feeding you should avoid. You take your cup and walk 2 steps into the rain to lose the closeness. And the rain walks you back into the tarp with the insistence of an elder correcting a child. Out at the edge of the sight, at the place where the path in shows itself in 2 darker lines, something heavier and more before in time moves. A line of gray through the fog, elk at a distance that under different weather would make you bring up a camera. Even their presence is in low relief now. They pass like a rumor you heard and forgot. You try the ranger station on your phone out of courtesy to your better self. You get a single bar that comes and goes like a breath and then goes for good, which is honest in a place that likes your attention on nearer things. You check your watch because you need a number to carry through the next hour, and the moisture has rewritten the face with a film you swipe off with a sleeve. Your mind sets little anchors and hopes they will hold. At 3 minutes, at 7, at 15. It is 15 by the time you notice the wet footprints are no longer pooling in speed. They appear full now, as if water is a paint that takes to certain shapes on its own. A line of them leads to your backpack and stops with the kind of decorum that makes you angrier than fear does. You don't touch the pack. You watch a drip gather at the tarp's lowest loop and fall the way small things end. And you set the cup on the table like you meant to do that. And you say, for you, not it. I'm waiting the rain out and leaving. The world obliges by giving you a break. It happens with a speed that feels like a trick, a lessening, a turning down of volume. The lines beyond the tarp lifting their heads again, the river's voice asserting itself with more space in the sentence. The canopy can turn a faucet both ways, and now it shuts off like a city. The forest tenses in that way living things do after an event. Water falls from every leaf and every sleeve, and then calms. You step past the tarp with the small, foolish swagger that comes with survival. And of course, the forest reminds you what you are by placing a cold, wet strand of something, fern or moss or old web, gently across your face. You curse the way people do when a joke lands. You kneel to wipe the fire ring's lip with your sleeve because you want to see what will become of water behaving like Prince in the absence of falling. Nothing happens, which is the wrong kind of miracle to believe in. That should be the end. That's the second lie you tell yourself. You shoulder your pack and cinch the straps and step to the path. And the first 3 paces are clean. You look back because some primitive part of you wants to tell the sight thank you out loud, and you remember too late not to give the past a face. The wet footprints have resumed. They no longer circle the ring or flirt with your table. They stand in a pair at the path's lip, and then proceed in a line ahead of your actual boots, as if someone is deciding for you what direction you've taken. You do not want to be between the idea of a person and the place that person is going. You step into the prints because there is nowhere else to put your feet. This is where reason does the last thing it can for you. It insists on topography and distance and human fallibility. You shorten your stride. The prints shorten their invitation by the same increment. You lengthen it. They ask you to aim further. The forest is a hall of green and gray, and the air is blue in the way this valley makes it on certain days. And there is a corridor of ground that seems to be writing your steps ahead of you in water darkness, while your own boots refuse to leave any mark at all on the moss you know from this morning was willing to be impressed. You consider turning back. You consider stepping off into the ferns and letting the ground be a low map you draw yourself. You consider waiting in the sight until some set of people arrives to say something ordinary in loud voices that can break weirdness by sheer collective confidence. The prints take a fork with the decision of a person who knows the trail. Not the person you are now, but the person who was here before and left circles burned into wood. The fork is wrong if you want your car. It is right if you want the river. You hear it more clearly now, the low, dull song that is a comfort and a threat, depending on how close you are to its teeth. The prints go that way. You go that way. The trail pitches to let you understood that your boots will be on stone soon. You come out to a bar that is not the bar you remember from the walk-in, which is expected and disappointing. The river here is wider and paler, the silt caught and drinking light. The footprints lead to a vestibule of stones near the waterline and stop. There is no more invitation beyond that. It isn't the end of a line. It's a door you are not asked to walk through unless you name yourself and ask. You wait a long time so that any story you tell later has the credibility of length. You listen to the river do what it always does, and you feel your heart find a comfortable place inside your ribs again because the river is not interested in you beyond physics. At your left, a slow crumble announces the movement of something large in the brush. Elk, or the mind trying to give itself something less precise to worry about than ideas. You watch the bright surface for any of the other tricks this valley likes. Reflections that tell on you, water that edits. But the river is committed only to its own work this hour. When you turn, you do it the way a dancer shifts a weight, careful not to teach the space what you plan. You walk back up the track, and your boots begin to write on the ground again, as if permission has been renewed. You pass the site carefully and do not look inside the ring. By the time you get back to the lot, the world has fully forgiven you for believing in water as a handwriting. Children argue about snacks. A truck door slams. A ranger in a green shirt answers a question about time in a patient voice. You take your boots off and they give back river stink, not magic. You look for residuals, wet on the laces that shouldn't be, mud in a pattern that suggests a story. And all you have is rain's aftertaste. You could leave. You don't immediately. You sit on your bumper and let the day climb back into your body, and you resolve to tell this one poorly, if you tell it at all. Because in the recounting is the invitation, and you have learned what the invitation sounds like. You finish your water and feel human again and drive out with the window cracked to let the valley's breath leave your skin. At home, the first damp thing you do not expect is the ring on your living room floor. A circle of darker carpet near the door that smells like the table at the site. You stand over it with the proprietary anger of people who pay rent. You clean it with the dull violence of towels and a fan, and it fades from the outer edge in, which you tell yourself is exactly what would happen with any water stain. You do not photograph it. You hang your coat and then take it down because it holds the forest like a person holds a child in their sleep, clinging without meaning to. The second wet thing is the line in your shower. A pair of footprints inside the tub you know you didn't make because you stepped in clean to clean yourself, and you can track the day of your own dirt if you try. They face out toward the curtain, and the towel over the rail is half damp the way a towel gets if someone grabbed it and didn't use it. You talk to yourself before you sleep. Water goes where water wants. Rain writes. Minds choose patterns to make despair pass. Camp stories throw hooks, and sometimes you drag them along by accident. You dream of nothing, which is mercy. On the third morning, you wake to a soft noise in the hall and find a ring of darker floor near the front door again. Faint, shrinking. You open the door to humor the thought, and the hall is clean and ordinary. You kneel and touch the ring, and it is not wet. It is only cooler. You go on with your day, because people go on with their days, and the city exposes you to other rules you must obey. Signals, bleats, the shape of a coffee cup lid. Months later, someone tells you a story at a party about wet footprints circling a tent and stopping. And you feel the strange twin pulls of ownership and relief. Because the worst thing is to be alone in a weirdness that rain taught your shoes how to make. You ask where it happened. You already know. You ask if they spoke their name out loud when it was happening. They say yes and make it a joke, because otherwise it is the rawest thing. You tell yours without making it grand or weird, refusing adjectives that make the room tilt. You finish by saying, "It was raining so hard it felt like the forest had legs." And sometimes water collects on dirt in shapes that look human. And if you can stand not to answer when your own mouth wants to say your name, the rain will get bored. It's not an answer. It's a sentence you can live with. The next time you're back on that trail and the sky changes its mind and someone's tarp still hangs, you will step under it. and you will thank whatever surface made room for you. And when the first wet print appears at the fire ring, you will let the forest do its job, and you will do yours. Wait and listen, and leave without asking it for anything that has to come home. Dusk in the hoe doesn't fall so much as it thickens, and the camera hates it. He loved that hate, the way the sensors started lying, the way edges blurred into something close to memory. He'd shot weddings and houses and infants and 100 cautious deer, but low light was the place the camera confessed. And the hoe at last light was a place built to get a confession. He parked near the visitor center and watched the lingering families with their damp jackets and sugar-high kids dissolve into cars, watched the river's breath sliding low over the asphalt, watched the ranger pull the door closed with that practiced end-of-day gesture that says, "The real park is open now." He'd come for a photograph of quiet, which is hubris. But he'd come anyway because certain problems, grain, motion, light dying early under a green lid, are the ones that make you feel like you earned your sleep. There was nothing mystical in the plan. He had a tripod and a fast prime, a body that behaved beautifully until it didn't, a plastic rain shell he'd hated since the first time it stuck to his neck, and a stubborn, civic desire to get the kind of image the people in town always claimed were impossible in a place like this, without flash. He walked the boardwalk to where the Hall of Moss opened its ribs and let his eyes go soft. Photographers work this place too much in summer and not enough when the day is closing, he thought, adjusting aperture with a mind that still loved numbers, even with a forest trying to dissolve them. His meter lied gently in the way it had learned to lie for him, and he composed with slow breath, knowing that held breath kills hands as surely as coffee does. He worked edges, not centerpieces. A lichen-thick limb crossing a lane of gold air, a cedar's flare glimmering like a skirt, a slow trickle making a stitch in the litter. He leaned into the camera's bad behavior on purpose, letting shutter drag just enough to make the moss look like moths. Every few frames he'd pull back and check histograms the way someone checks a sleeping child's breath, his face glowing pale for a second in the dim like a frog's belly. He was happy. It's a word grown men are allowed to use in a forest because there's no audience to punish them. The sound here was the river's long sentence and the almost silence that gets written into you whether or not the Navy is flying that day. And the only human noise was his own jacket making small, sweet complaints as he moved. He was close to done when a child's cry cut at the ribs of it. Not a scream. An "I'm not done" kind of wail someone gave to a parent who was moving them toward a car. He smiled at the normal, mechanical sadness of families trying to leave places that made them bigger and smaller at once. The cry came from back toward the visitor center, filtered by trunks and layer on layer of green. He drifted that way to catch the last shot, the one where you aim for the feeling of a place and get only its shape. The lot had thinned to a handful of vehicles, and a ranger's truck that still had its voice in it even after the key was gone. He lifted the camera to get the long, low line of the roof against fog and clicked for the pleasure the thumb takes in ending. The first anomaly he wanted to forgive was a gray vertical along the roof line. A smear nothing. The kind of technological stutter you swear you could feel in your hands when the shutter dragged across a boundary it couldn't find. He chimped without shame. Professionals pretend they don't. They all do. And the frame did the thing you keep shooting for. Told you a secret your eyes missed. A thin, tall shape stood against the visitor center wall. An outline with no commitment, the sort of vertical this place is full of, but wrong because of its uniformity. Bark takes light in mottles and stripes. This took it as cloth takes it, flat and obedient. He could have thrown the hit away, could have labeled it emotion. ISO lied to the weeping edges of bad sensor math. He decided instead on one more for his pride. He steadied like you steady a mug on a narrow table. Shallow breath and knees unlocked. Last shudder of the day, he told the body. Earn it. He clicked. The shape didn't vanish. It saved a place for itself, a cutout the environment had agreed to host. He laughed once because laughter is the ancient thing you do when tools misbehave. And he said to the air without meaning anything by it, hold still. The air, polite and old, held. He took a third. This time the frame gave him the same outline, but a little closer to the edge, as if drawn to the lens. He felt that old, bad tickle behind the teeth that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with humility not arriving fast enough. He lowered the camera and the roofline was only roofline, and the wall only wall, and the fog only the theater of ordinary air. He lifted the camera again, and the thing had stepped in so close that the frame caught a hint of a fold at what would be a shoulder if it were a person. There are solid explanations for ghosts in cameras. Low light does arithmetic wrong. IR from a motion sensor inside leaks, and the sensor interprets its own hiccup as an object. Compression takes one problem and builds a second out of it with enthusiasm. Moisture gets on glass and turns a clean line into pudding. He wrote each of these across the inside of his skull in a font large enough to read in a hurry. The little rationalist who lives inside people who make pictures made his case and was not persuasive because the feeling didn't match. An artifact doesn't feel like a gaze. He paced himself backward along the lot lines until he had a depth of field he trusted again, until the numbers steadied. The outline drifted in the frame like a polite person making room for you to back up. When the ranger came out the side door and saw him, he lifted 2 fingers in casual solidarity. Closing up, he said, in the tone men use at work when the darkness is close enough to be referenced, but not close enough to admit. You get your shots? He said yes because it was the simplest thing to say. He did not say, I think something is making fun of my tools. The ranger tilted his head at the fog the way locals do, as if someone had said something out loud in a room and you were trying to catch it, and then went to his truck. The shape did nothing a camera could track while the ranger's body moved through the frame. And then the truck was an idea beyond the bend in the road, and the lot returned to human emptiness. He walked the interior once more with a good kind of tired in his knees, then shouldered out to the lot, wanting the everyday wrongness of zipper teeth and wrist tendons to write over the soft wrongness the sensor was insisting on. He put the camera in the trunk because sometimes courage looks like boundaries, and he stood there with the rain just beginning to fall in a way that felt conversational. No lecture, not yet. And he waited for his head to catch up to his body. He adjusted his mirror because ritual is how you anchor yourself to cars. And in the mirror, the shape sat in the back seat. It wasn't sitting, not in any way that a human sits. It was occupying the space where a body would if a body had folded polite limbs and waited. His head turned around slower than his heart wanted. The back seat had a jacket and a camera bag and an umbrella he never used. His hand hovered above the door handle and then chose the lock instead, because admitting fear in front of nothing felt too naked. He breathed and watched his own hands be older than he believed. The mirror now gave back only the trunk's blunt geometry and the ceiling of forest pressing down its low choir. He listened to rain find itself in 100 surfaces. On the drive out, the road exaggerated its own curves the way wet roads do, and the trees formed a tunnel that made him feel both safe and like the oldest prey. He kept checking the rear view with the compulsion of someone trying to see a cruel joke coming. Twice the mirror offered him his own dumb face and the toy lights of a car behind him the way a city kudzu grows out here sometimes, fellow travelers in search of the same dusk. Between those glances, once, it gave him the outline again. Not in the back seat, but behind the car, tall and thin and the color of fog. Standing in the slot the road made, exactly at the distance a portrait lens would like a face to be. He watched it tear into static and resolve, the mirror arguing with its own angles. He did not break. You do not break to negotiate with a metaphor. You do not speed up either, because hurry is the stupidest posture an animal can have in the dark. He did what you do when you decide fear doesn't get to ride. He said the names of things in order: road, river, sign, roof, tree. Then he said names of people he knew like beads, until the tendency he had to say his own broke itself on the ritual. When the road straightened for that last half mile where the canopy lifts its hand and lets a colder light fall on the asphalt, he looked in the mirror one last time in that romantic way men who shoot landscapes have. Like the rear view is a second chance at a scene you just left. The outline did not wave goodbye. It did not vanish in a theatrical way. It simply suggested itself less until the mirror accommodated his own face again, and the world was all surface. At home, the card reader did what card readers do: swallowed the wafer and opened a window that turned the day into cubes. He scrolled carefully, the way a person reads scan results for lines they don't want. The first frames were the ones he wanted to post and then pretend not to care about. Soft blur of green like an argument made by moths. Low river light like a kind face. A set of compositions that told the truth he could get to with his hands. Then the lot and the roofline and the wall, and in them the gray vertical might as well have been printed with the camera brand's logo. Not a smear. A thing. The sequence showed it doing the one thing that made him want to pull a blanket over his head. Stepping closer across a gap with the deliberateness of a model hitting marks. He printed one in a cheap, unlovely way on office paper, because putting things on paper can turn them back into paper. He carried it to the kitchen and taped it to the wall, and tried to look at it like a child you are trying not to disturb. It made no move or sound of any sort, because paper is the easiest hostage. He sat down on the floor because sitting turns threat into story. And he made this one obedient. Low light, sensor drift, ghosting, the real kind, the camera kind. IR from the center's alarm punching the sensor at a weird angle. Your own breath making micro shake when you thought you were a machine. A tree's own shape reading wrong under fog, and there, count to 10 and be better. He slept badly and then hard. At 3 there was a sound in the house that in any other context would have been a neighbor's trunk, a building away. And here was wood settling. Were he generous? And here was the sound of a person leaning and then changing their mind. He lay still and waited for the worst, and it did not arrive. His body shamed him by remembering his fear faster than his mind did. In the morning, the paper on the kitchen wall had a ripple in it from steam or time, and the shape was unchanged, still thin and tall and cordial in its refusal to be explicable. He boiled water and set the cup down, and looked, and nothing in his kitchen supported a rational fight with last night. He did not post at once. He did what adults who have learned to be suspicious of their own evidence do. He showed exactly 3 people. One knew cameras as a family joke. This one said kindly, motion plus exposure plus humidity plus the algorithm that makes the phone preview lie. One knew the valley's weather, the way a person knows a house they grew up in. This one said kindly, fog eats edges. Defaults are wrong out there. Your brain had already decided without you. The third was a park volunteer whose mouth had the shape of someone who has been taught to love and defend quiet like a species and treat stories like campfires. Useful heat if tended, trouble if left. This one said, "You saw something. That happens. Don't make it more. Don't make it less." He went back, because the mind won't leave a tool half broken. The next dusk was worse, and kindly in other ways. The ranger station door was closed, and the polite sign said so. He stood near the roof line and took nothing but breath. The sensor misbehaved in all the usual ways and gave him moths and mist and the great vertebrae of old trees and refused to hang a person-shaped hole on the wall. He stood with his hands in his pockets, like a man waiting to be forgiven and hurt for reasons too small to say out loud. On his way out, he lifted the camera and took a too-dark photo of his own reflection in the station glass for a joke he would tell later to nobody. And the glass returned his face. Then for half a second flattened to fog gray, and then returned the room behind it, with the focus on a spot behind his left shoulder where there was no one. He changed nothing. He let the camera sleep. He said, on the drive home, the names of things the way he does when he needs feet to obey. Road, river, sign, roof, tree. And because he had learned the exact right size of pride in this, he did not say his own name. He let it sit as if it were a precious bird on a fence post near a road, and he drove as if not startling it would keep it with him. Weeks later, a gallery asked for 5 prints from the trip. He sent 4 that were safe and 1 that was not, and hung them, and stood in a room with walls that pretend to know what art is, and listened to people say exactly what the valley wanted. It looks like a glitch. It looks like motion. Sensors do that in low light. It's a person. It's a trick. It's a mistake. It's a costume. It's nothing. That night, he dreamed a camera dream, the kind that mixes work and superstition and kitchen chairs. In the dream, he raised a camera and did not press the shutter, and the thing that had been standing in the edge of frames and mirrors and minds turned its head in the deliberate, courteous way of something waiting to be named, and it waited the exact length of a long exposure. And then he lowered the camera, and it was closer because that is how it had agreed to move with him. He woke with the word on his tongue that he would not say. He drank water. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the paper print, and it had yellowed along the edge where the tape was cheap, and the outline on it was still only ink pretending to be light. He kept the picture. He kept his tools. He kept his stubbornness. He went back to the hoe many times and got beautiful, boring, believable work. Some dusks, when the visitor center sighed into evening and the last car left, and the lot made that particular hush a roof makes after a day of feet. He raised the camera and took the same photograph and let the sensor lie and tell the truth in equal measures. And when he checked, there were trees and fog and a wet roof and his own small, borrowed breath printed invisibly into every frame, and nothing else that could be trusted asserted itself. He counted that as good. He counted that as earned. He counted that as the kind of answer a place like this gives. Not everything you see needs you to believe in it, and not everything you don't see stops when you stop looking. The transmission begins with breathing, not frantic, disciplined, metered, the kind cadence a trained body falls into when the map and the ground stop speaking the same language. The timestamp rolls over to a number the base can live with. The GPS drifts, then catches, and the body cam feeds its narrow strip of forest to a screen that does not understand depth. The voice that breaks the hush is hers, low, steady, clipped at the edges like someone saving the consonants for later. Copy. On Hoe River Trail past Spruce Spur. Fog thickening. Returning to last known. If you've worked enough nights, you know the difference between a person pushing and a person conserving. She is conserving. The call-out started normal. An overdue solo day hiker reported by a roommate who only grew worried when the phone slept through its own alarm. Whole campsites emptying under an incoming front, rangers doing the math on miles versus daylight. A storm line fattening over the valley that likes to pull rain out of air the way a hand wrings cloth. She drew the assignment because she knows this side, because her feet hold the rhythm of boardwalk, because she can mark the junctions in her head with the same certainty other people reserve for childhood kitchens. Before the fog pressed down, the plan was an out and back to confirm the car sat where it should, and to catch the easy margin where busy trails coax the lost back into lines. The plan shifted the way plans do when the canopy edits light until time becomes a rumor. What the camera sees is a pale tunnel and a lamp that refuses to be theatrical. The beam paints damp cedar bark with the same tenderness it would give skin. Her breath arrives steady. Under it, the river's low voice works at its endless sentence, edited by moss into something your ears have to lean into to catch. This is the part that, later, draws ordinary people to offices and kitchens to watch a small screen in a way that makes the muscles at the corners of their mouths go tight without them noticing. This is the moment where you can still tell yourself, she will turn around in the next 2 minutes and the tape will be nothing but professionalism. She narrates the ordinaries. Bridge, marker, blowdown. Her words pace the trail like a lantern in a book. Fog at ankle height becomes fog at thigh, fog at shoulder. The beam picks up the white rib of something dead and doesn't linger. She calls the subject's name once, not as a ritual to wake the forest, but as a lever to pry human out of it. And the name slides into the green and disappears. The base doesn't say the thing they are thinking. Don't say it more. They might not believe in rules that old, but they believe in breath being a door and will not help her open it. At a junction that should be the one before the little pond with a 2-storied name, the camera yawns, left, right. A small camera tilt that in a living neck means, where are the edges? She says, copy to nobody. To herself. To the notebook in her head. She breathes, and the microphone hears the sound of a jacket whispering against a strap. Then, without comment, the forest sets a fact on the tape. Her name, shaped by an exhale that is not hers. It doesn't sound like a voice. There's no throat under it. It arrives on the membrane of quiet like a pattern that finally resolves. The room at base stiffens. The supervisor moves from standing to leaning, that half-inch of shift that says, stay rational. On the trail, she sets her hand on a cedar and goes still. The camera doesn't flinch. She says nothing back. The fog closes its fist a little tighter. The beam works less well on distances now and begins to prefer the honesty of near things. Bark textures, the shiny theater of slick leaves, the coined silver surface of places where water caught itself and held. The sound goes out for a second the way sound does when you drop a piston into a well, not dead, but traveled. She breathes in counts. You can see if you have watched enough tape to know how a good mind tempers a good body. The bass says her call sign in that controlled tone dispatchers use when panic would be a contaminant. She answers with a clipped back, here. The relief is cheap and extremely valuable. Past the pond spur that people argue about online, whether it reflects truth or mischief, whether people who bring their names to it deserve what water does with them. She makes a small decision off camera and ends up making a large one. She leaves the main drag to check a game trail cut, because most mistakes begin as small permissions. The camera dips and the forest obliges by moving closer. The tape gets good in the way that makes good people hate themselves for saying it. The mist takes shape and then doesn't. The beam catches suspended droplets that sparkle like bad jewelry. The grounds give translates into a soft, intimate noise you know your shoes have made 1,000 times, even if you don't remember it. She says copy into the fog, without depressing the mic. A thing people do when they need their mouths to reassure their feet. The next minute becomes the kind that needs to be measured to be believed. The audio drops to a fullness that is not absence and holds for 37 seconds. Not 36, not 38. A number that means nothing and everything in a valley where quiet has habits like any other animal. On tape, you can hear the human urge to push words into that gap fail and turn into patience. On the trail, she turns her head an inch, which is a movement but not a concession. At 37 and a breath, sound returns in pieces. The brush's tiny contractions when something larger than a person moves far enough away to be believable as elk. The far raven making a wrench noise in its throat, the fabric of her sleeve deciding not to stick to her wrist any longer. The bass marks the gap because marking is control. She speaks again, finally. No subject. Returning. The map in her voice draws an arrow the camera tries to honor. The small red stone that marks a famous inch of quiet is nowhere to be seen because the tape is not about signs and altars. It's about the impolite fact of getting back. The beam flicks and catches her own breath briefly in a small cloud. And that is a mercy, to see one's own body behave in public under pressure. She moves, careful, careful. The camera makes the forest into an allegory, and then into an obstacle course, and then back into forest. The thing that makes the tape not work for the heart happens so gently, most viewers don't catch the exact frame it arrives in. Just beyond the edge of the beam, a vertical where none belonged, slender as a decision and the wrong color for wood. It can be argued that the camera invented it, that sensors gasp in humidity and see themselves. People who have spent enough nights in this green will tell you not everything made of cloth needs a mouth. She does not tilt into it. She does not feed it. She makes a straight line for the sound that has never lied to a person born. The river. The camera shakes once, and you know out here that means she has brushed a low limb and broke a balance and recovered without making a theater of it. Her breath hitch is a page flip. The white noise of the hoe fattens until you can feel why people sleep badly for 3 nights afterward. Because silence has been replaced with one continuous body. At the bank, the fog thins above water the way it sometimes allows a sky to exist. The lamp works here as if rewarded for endurance. Stones gleam. The pale silt tells a clean lie about how shallow danger is. The obvious path is a fiction that will be disproved if you study it. She kneels because that's how you tell your calves not to do something stupid. Her hand enters the frame, and she touches a wet rock that obliges by being precisely what it claims. When the name comes again, it comes from out across the water. Shaped by a breath that could be the valley's, and the camera's mic takes it with the same indifference it takes rain. The bass says her call sign with a stitch of warning in it now, because you do not annoy rivers with theater. She does not answer the name. Hers. She says, stepping back. She stands, and the beam takes one last, indulgent pass over stones that will look the same for the next 1,000 people, and will betray half of them if they think they know them. She turns, and the camera returns to the hard, daily miracle of a trail reappearing underfoot when you need it. Somewhere between river and boardwalk, the fog finds a playful mood and drafts with her. The tape catches small human inventory. The slight slide of a boot on duff, the clack of a clip against a buckle, the small click of a radio's push to talk when the thumb tests it without sending. She speaks to bass to keep the line alive, and her mouth does the subtle, messy thing mouths do when they are refusing to say their own names. When the outline steps into the world where numbers can be attached to it. It does it at the edge of a sign the beam licks into existence, Next junction, 1/4 mile. Tall, thin, the uniform gray of a flag in rain. The lens refuses to put a face on it, and so do responsible people. Watch 100 times, and you will argue 100 different rational anatomies for it. Low branch shoulder, with epiphytes making a sleeve. 2 trunks married by moss to look like cloth. A trick of depth where a hallucination of nearness happens to everyone with a light at some point. Watch once with the sound off, and you might feel your own throat behave like someone is trying to breathe at the same time you are. She does not move toward it. She does not flinch away. The beam moves right as if it had been politely asked to. And then the tape troubleshoots itself into a mechanical problem. A 3-second smear. A whiteout like breath on glass, a static pop that feels like winter. And then clarity. The sign remains. The gray does not. She makes the boardwalk like a pilgrim who did not believe they would again. Shoes on wood is the most forgiving sound in the world. In a place where soil takes prints, it will not explain. She narrates countable nouns like she's been taught by people who learned not to feed the jazz of fear. Rail, step, turn. The beam paints screws that have rusted in decorative ways and checks for elk that sometimes take their constitutional at dusk on this exact stretch and settle a day's argument in a gesture. The base calls times, and she answers with the kind of clean their training hopes for. This is the part where people let their shoulders drop and then realize they did it too soon. At the last bend before the visitor center's roofline, the tape goes to that fullness again. 37 seconds. The stopwatch in the room will later confirm it, and half the staff will claim they could feel it in their back teeth before they saw the number. The world holds the sound of her breath outside your reach and then returns it as if it had only borrowed it to read it. She stops in a human way. You can watch her learn the number for what it is, not a threat, a habit. She says copy and laughs one syllable at herself because sometimes sobriety tastes like laughter when you don't have a better word. The building arrives out of fog like all honest shelters do. Too sudden, too square, too good. The camera picks up reflective glass that returns only lamp and fog and a suggestion that rooms are real. The radio thickens with indoor life and stray static, and the relief in the bass's voice is something you cannot write into a report without making a fool of language. She steps under the roof overhang. The tape catches something ordinary. Keys moving in a pocket, coins declaring themselves, and something almost, but not quite. The polite sound wood makes when weight is set on it, not by feet, but by care. The microphone wants to decide if it was rain, finishing small jobs on an eve, or someone setting a tin down on a table a long time ago. It doesn't decide. Inside on the bench, she sits down in the frame you can infer from the angle of the lamp, and you hear the sound that tells you the body knows it has permission to be less. The bass asks if she wants the next team to push further. She says yes without drama, a word so clean you can hang something on it. Her voice is her voice. Breath stays inside the frame where it belongs. She gives her time and her least bad guess at what the fog thinks the map is today. The tape is almost over. The room at base has restarted its other jobs. People begin to unfreeze in the practiced way work demands. The last 30 seconds of the card are the ones that make strangers sit on folding chairs in briefing rooms and in living rooms, and in every room in between, with a stillness their lives do not otherwise permit. The camera, without authorization or hands, rotates a degree toward the vestibule. The beam licks the glass and comes back unblessed. In the pane is the most boring reflection in the world, lamp, shoulder, cap brim. And behind that reflection, for a shape's width and no more, something stands with the patience of a person who has waited 100 years to be introduced properly. Tall, thin, gray as new fog. The shape does not reach for her. It does not own the room. It waits one exactly human second for nothing, then dissolves the way honest water does when something drops into it and fails to keep itself together. The card ends not with drama, but with a battery warning chirp and the sound you've come to love. The little knocks of a person ceasing to prepare and beginning to exist again. Later, the report will say what reports must. Subject found next day by second team. Cold and embarrassed. 2 miles down an unmarked spur. Weather deteriorated, Upper Ho Road temporarily closed. Organized search shut down on schedule. Communications intermittent near the known point of outage. No injury to responding personnel. A second report will be written for other eyes about a trend in outages that behave like measured events, with a suggestion for a relay that winter will eat anyway. The tape will be archived under a number and a date and a line that doesn't mention a person-shaped negative at the edge of glass because there is no field required for that, and work cannot hold it without spilling. What she carries home is not the tape. It is the number that taught her breath a new corner. It is the sense that some valleys own habits, and you can either learn them or be inconvenienced. It is the memory of not saying her name when the air put the shape of it near her ear without the burden of a throat. When she wakes in her small room in town at 3 a.m. to a quiet with walls and a refrigerator that hums in an ugly, comforting way. She counts to 37 and lets the world keep being a world. She doesn't watch the card again because that would be a kind of feeding. She doesn't tell a story because stories make doors. When the call goes out the next time, fog, someone who misread the way the river gives false shallows. She puts on her coat and touches the edge of the bench on her way through the visitor center without looking at her hand afterward. If you want to believe in hauntings, the tape will let you. If you want to believe in habits, of fog, of signal, of a valley that likes to hold your breath and offer it back measured, the tape will let you too. The truth is a thing the Ho is good at defending politely. It watches and waits and teaches the patience and confounds the proud and, now and then, puts an outline in a window so you can calibrate your fear against a body instead of a number. And when it lets you go, you leave with a silence inside you that is heavier than sleep and lighter than dread. And you conserve it the way trained bodies conserve anything worth keeping. If this kind of story holds you the way the valley holds breath, subscribe and stay close. There's more waiting in the quiet. Join the next descent into the dark with verified fears.